I once witnessed a person who was supposed to protect the law commit a barbaric act for a completely ridiculous reason. My name is Josh, and that fateful day is carved into my mind in perfect detail, even though 7 years have passed. It was a weekend afternoon, and I went to Costco to buy groceries for the upcoming week. The weekend crowd was huge and the store was bustling. While I was waiting in line at the sample cart for some sausages, I noticed a family standing right in front of me. It was a middle-aged mom and dad with their adult son, who I guessed was around 30 years old. What caught my attention was the unusual behavior of the son. He kept waving his hands, rocking his body back and forth, and spinning around with a completely blank expression. When he stopped moving, he stared intensely at a fidget spinner held by a child standing nearby. Since the line was moving slowly, I struck up a conversation with the family, choosing my words carefully to ask about him. The father responded very warmly, and the mother gently explained that their son's name was Kenneth. She told me he had severe autism and was completely nonverbal. They often brought him out to get used to crowded places instead of keeping him cooped up at home all day. Hearing that made me pause for a few seconds. I watched Kenneth as he stared at the tray of sausages with the eager, innocent excitement of a little kid. He was so lucky to have such wonderful parents. Looking at them right then, I just saw a normal family trying to enjoy a peaceful evening together. But just a few short minutes later, everything changed completely. Standing in line ahead of Kenneth's family was a tall, heavily built man holding a toddler in his arms. The man stepped up to the sample cart when it was his turn. I later found out that this man was an off-duty LAPD police officer. Suddenly, Kenneth made a quick movement toward the back of this man's head. I only saw his arms swing out, and the next thing I knew, the off-duty officer stumbled forward onto the floor. The little boy the man was holding didn't fall, but he was terrified and started crying loudly, which drew the attention of everyone nearby. At first, I thought it was just an accidental bump, which is hard to avoid in a thick crowd, but the reaction of Kenneth's parents made me realize instantly that things were much more serious. Kenneth's mother turned completely pale and started screaming apologies at the man. Meanwhile, Kenneth's father rushed toward the man, frantically explaining over and over that their son was sick and didn't understand what he was doing. But the man showed absolute indifference to what the parents were saying. With one arm still holding his child, he used his other hand to immediately pull out a concealed handgun. Before anyone could even react, the first gunshot rang out. Screams instantly followed. Then came a second shot, a third, and a rapid barrage of gunfire echoing through the entire area. The whole supermarket turned into pure chaos. Screams and crying erupted from every direction. The crowd began pushing, shoving, and trampling over one another to escape and find cover. Abandoned shopping carts were left scattered in the middle of the aisles, making the frantic escape even more brutal. I was no exception. I dove behind a display shelf at the sound of the third shot. But from my angle, I could still see Kenneth collapse onto the floor. The thing that horrified me the most was watching his parents actively shield their son with their own bodies while the bullets kept flying. They were desperately trying to protect him. Both of them were struck by the gunfire and collapsed on top of him. When the final gunshot echoed and stopped, it was replaced by the sound of weeping and desperate cries for help everywhere. I froze, unable to take my eyes off the horrific sight of Kenneth and his parents lying motionless in a pool of blood. The parents were still in a hugging position, trying to shield their son. That image is something I will never forget. In the days that followed, the news of the shooting flooded all the media outlets. The official reports stated that Kenneth had been shot multiple times from behind and died instantly at the scene. His parents were shot in the back and stomach, suffering extremely critical injuries. The father had to have a portion of his organs removed and fell into a deep coma. Many years have gone by, but I am still haunted by that brief conversation I had with Kenneth's family just minutes before the tragedy. I can still clearly picture the father's kind smile and hear the gentle voice of the mother explaining their son's condition. They just wanted to give Kenneth a normal afternoon out, like any other family. I could feel so clearly that their eyes were filled with nothing but pure love. They were completely open about sharing things about their son, without a single hint of exhaustion or bitterness. They were such a happy family. I never could have imagined that just a few minutes later, their lives would be shattered forever. My name is Iris, and I live in Leicester, North Carolina, a quiet community that is half country and half suburb. My closest neighbor was a woman named Holly, who lived alone with her 2 pet dogs. Since we both had a habit of waking up early to go jogging, we often ran into each other and would jog together for a stretch. We weren't incredibly close, but we always shared some friendly small talk whenever we met. One morning, I went out for my usual jog, but Holly was nowhere to be found. As I passed by her house, I noticed a strange man standing near her driveway. He looked unkempt with messy hair, and his eyes kept darting around as if he were keeping watch. In his hand, he was holding a black trash bag. The moment our eyes met, he suddenly flashed a friendly smile, which completely contradicted his sneaky behavior from a second ago. It made me feel uncomfortable, and I didn't want to get involved in someone else's business, so I pretended not to notice and kept running. On my second lap around the block, I passed Holly's house again, and the man was gone. However, the black trash bag had been left behind near the edge of the road, about 20 yards away from her property. I assumed he was just some litter bug dumping his garbage in someone else's neighborhood. I didn't see Holly for the rest of my morning jog. I figured she wasn't feeling well and had decided to skip her workout for the day. But by that afternoon, I still hadn't seen her out walking her dogs like she always did. Holly owned 2 large dogs that were incredibly energetic, and she took them outside to run around every single day. Seeing them cooped up felt very strange, and a bad feeling started lingering in the back of my mind. The next morning, as I jogged past her house, I heard the dogs whining from inside. They sounded miserable and highly distressed. Trusting my gut, I stopped and decided to go check on things. I called out her name a few times, but no one answered. Noticing the front door was unlocked and cracked open, I hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. Following the sound of the whimpering, I found the 2 dogs locked inside a guest bedroom. They were scratching at the door and crying continuously. The moment I let them out, they began searching the house, running straight into Holly's master bedroom to look for their owner. I hurried after them and froze in shock. The safe had been pried wide open, and the bedroom window was smashed to pieces. Sensing that something terrible had happened, I called the police immediately. When the police arrived to inspect the home, they confirmed there were clear signs of a break-in. However, there was no blood, no signs of a struggle, and 0 evidence to prove an attack had actually taken place inside. At first, the officers assumed Holly had simply gone out of town for a few days. That night, right after I drifted off to sleep, I had a horrific nightmare. In the dream, I saw my neighbor dead. Her body was trapped under a car, and a pair of large hands was dragging her away. The scene then shifted into a bathroom, where a man was stripping off her clothes and stuffing them into a black trash bag. I bolted upright in bed, drenched in sweat, with my heart hammering violently against my ribs. The image of the black trash bag from my nightmare immediately connected with the exact bag the unkempt man had been holding in front of Holly's house the day before. As soon as the sun came up, I contacted the police and gave them every detail about the suspicious stranger. I later learned that the police managed to track the trash collection route for our area. But since 2 days had already passed, The garbage had been hauled to a massive landfill, making the search incredibly difficult. After sorting through mounds of waste, they finally found a black trash bag matching my description. Inside were Holly's blood-stained clothes, along with DNA and fingerprints belonging to the man. The suspect was quickly identified as a man named Gavin. He lived in a remote part of town and had known Holly previously. According to Gavin's confession, everything started as an accident when he asked Holly to help push his stuck vehicle. He claimed he accidentally hit the gas pedal instead of the brake and ran her over, killing her instantly. Instead of panicking or calling 911, the savage killer calmly drove her body to his property, dismembered her, and burned the remains to destroy the evidence. After that, he casually returned to Holly's house, broke the window, and cracked the safe to stage a robbery and throw off the investigation. I thought that was the most horrifying part of the story. But as the police dug deeper into his background, they discovered Gavin was linked to a cold case involving a missing person from 15 years ago. On his property, investigators uncovered a hidden pit containing human skeletal remains that had been burned and concealed for over a decade. To this day, what haunts me the most isn't just what Gavin did to Holly. It is the memory of him standing just a few feet away from me, holding a bag containing his victim's bloody clothes, looking me dead in the eye and smiling. It was the calculated smile of a cold-blooded killer. If I had let my curiosity get the better of me and stopped talking to him that morning, I could have very easily become another missing person on Gavin's record. Following the tragedy, I went through the legal process to adopt Holly's poor dogs. Every day when I walk them down our usual path and look over at Holly's empty house, I silently promise her that I will take the best care of them. It is my way of thanking fate for letting me survive my encounter with a monster. This story is inspired by a true case that shocked the nation in 2015. A young couple, Christy Schoen and Joseph Codd, suddenly vanished from their home in North Carolina while expecting their first child. The crime scene showed signs of a staged break-in. Thanks to neighbors who reported a suspicious vehicle, police arrested Robert Jason Owens, a handyman who knew the family. He confessed to accidentally running them over, dismembering them, and burning their remains in a wood stove. A wider investigation revealed this killer was also responsible for the high-profile disappearance of a college student named Zeb Quinn 15 years earlier in the year 2000.
That fateful night helped me turn my life around, but it happened in the most horrific way a human being could ever experience. My name is Dante. Years ago, when I was an addict living on the streets of Philadelphia, my entire life revolved around finding enough money for my next fix. At first, I worked all kinds of odd jobs like delivering packages and loading trucks to pay for my drugs. But as my addiction grew worse, my body started failing me. My need for the drugs increased, so I turned to theft. I noticed an older man in my neighborhood who lived all alone in a rather luxurious townhouse. He seemed wealthy, kept to himself, and was usually away from home in the evening. So one night, while experiencing a violent wave of withdrawal, I risked breaking into his house. My plan was to steal anything I could sell. As soon as I stepped inside, I smelled a very strong chemical odor. Right as I paused, I jumped in fear because it felt like hundreds of eyes were staring directly at me in the dark. I stood frozen for a few seconds. When nothing happened, I slowly shined my flashlight around. I realized the entire house was filled with life-sized dolls. I was startled, but the withdrawal pains were too intense for me to feel proper fear or care about the owner's eccentricity. I began rummaging through everything, searching for valuables, but the house contained nothing except for those dolls. Losing my patience as my cravings hit a breaking point, I started to snap. I began knocking over furniture and cursing. In a fit of rage, I swung my arm and shoved a doll that was sitting on a nearby armchair. When it hit the floor, my first thought was that it felt unusually heavy. It made a dull, solid thud against the ground, completely missing the hollow, brittle sound of plastic or foam. Immediately, an automated musical melody started playing from inside the doll. It sounded like a wooden music box, but the tune was strangely warped and distorted. I bent down and shined my flashlight closer. Because of the hard fall, the doll's head had snapped completely off the body. Right then, a disgusting stench mixed with the heavy smell of chemicals rushed up my nose, making me gag. What was sticking out from under the dress wasn't a plastic arm. It looked like shriveled, dried-up skin. My heart began to pound wildly. With a shaking hand, I moved the beam of light over to the head, lying right next to it. The wax mask on one side of the cheek had cracked open from the impact. Beneath that outer layer of wax, there was absolutely no plastic mold. It was a real human skull, covered in dried, stained scalp skin, with two empty, deep black eye sockets staring straight back at me. It felt like a jolt of electricity surged through my brain. I was so stunned that I completely forgot about my withdrawal symptoms. I slowly panned my flashlight around, looking back at the dozens of dolls surrounding the house. I snapped completely out of my drug haze as I realized exactly what I was standing in the middle of. In a state of total panic, I dropped the flashlight, sprinted out the front door, and just kept running and vomiting frantically. I found a public payphone and called the police. For the next few days, I watched the news constantly, waiting for the results of the police investigation. Finally, the official details were released. Right after receiving my call, the police had searched the house and found a massive list of suspicious items, research files on hundreds of cemeteries, maps marking the locations of specific graves, digging tools, and plenty of documents proving the homeowner was grave robbing. The owner of the house was Professor Victor, a famous historian who had appeared on television and was highly respected as a model intellectual. But behind that image lay a horrific truth. The 29 dolls inside that house were not models at all. They were all real human beings that he had collected. It turned out that the evenings he was away from home were spent wandering around local cemeteries, digging up and stealing corpses. Just thinking about the fact that I used to walk past that house without knowing what was hidden inside sends a chill down my spine. The hundreds of eyes staring at me when I entered that house were actually real. It wasn't a hallucination caused by my addiction. After the investigation, the court concluded that Victor suffered from paranoid schizophrenia and truly believed his own distorted thoughts. They also determined he had no other deviant motives toward the bodies. However, that didn't make his actions any less horrifying. When he stood in court, Victor looked directly at the families of the victims and coldly stated, "You abandoned your daughters. I am the one who brought them back and kept them warm." That sentence made the entire courtroom go silent in shock. The families were filled with rage and agony, hearing the man who dug up their children's bodies speak such words. In the end, Victor was committed to a mental hospital indefinitely. As for me, after that horrific night, I was determined to get clean. That night made me realize that if I kept living that way, I would sooner or later die in some lonely corner or push myself into an even worse nightmare. I am Daniel, 40 years old. I came very close to death. It all started during a flight in June of this year. My brother Jacob and I were flying from Mumbai back to Manchester for our cousin's wedding. The flight took place in the morning. The weather was sunny and clear. I sat in seat 11A by the emergency exit. Jacob was next to me. Everything was normal as the plane taxied onto the runway. I even texted my wife that we were about to take off. No one thought that 30 seconds later, everything would fall apart. Right after the plane left the ground, I felt the engine stutter, as if it was choked. In the very next second, in a chilling moment of silence, the entire plane seemed to stall in midair. There was no engine sound, only the sound of breathing and a pounding heart in my ears. 5 seconds later, the left engine emitted a deafening explosion. My entire body was thrown forward out of the seat, then violently pulled back by the seatbelt, causing my chest to slam into the strap and my breath caught in my lungs. Everything in the cabin swayed in a fraction of a second. The cabin lights flashed erratically, green mixed with white, then went dark. A flight attendant screamed something, but before the sentence was finished, the plane plunged straight down. I saw Jacob's face turn to look at me, his eyes wide, his lips moving without a sound. Then everything exploded. The sound of twisting metal, shattering glass. Other passengers' screams merged with a terrifying crash. The plane had collided, as I later learned, with a medical student dormitory. The impact flung me to the right. My head slammed into the side of the plane, and my vision was a mix of red and black. A constant ringing noise filled my ears. The smell of burnt fuel and thick smoke was overwhelming. In that moment, I thought I was dead, but I don't know how long it was before I opened my eyes and I was still breathing. My eyes were blurry from smoke and debris, but I could still see the hellish scene around me. Plane seats were shredded. Bent metal jutted out everywhere like giant blades. Bodies were scattered in various positions, blood pooling on the floor. My left arm wouldn't move. A searing pain ran from my shoulder down the entire left side of my body. My leg was trapped under the collapsed seat in front of me. I remembered and shouted Jacob's name, but there was only silence. I heard the distant sound of a fire truck siren. As I crawled out of the passenger compartment, I collapsed onto the shattered concrete of the building. A police officer ran over. He said something, but I couldn't hear clearly. All I could hear was a long ringing in my ears. I was put into an ambulance. What I remember next was the terrible pain. After receiving treatment, this is what I was left with. My shoulder was fractured in 2 places. My back had a spinal injury. My right kneecap was shattered. The left side of my body was partially paralyzed. I couldn't lift my left arm above my shoulder. I moved back to Buffalo for treatment, but the physical pain was followed by mental exhaustion and obsession. I lived in a closed room, refusing to see anyone. I didn't talk to my wife and children, though I once considered them my whole world. My 4-year-old son once asked, "Where does Daddy hurt?" But I couldn't answer. I could only sleep 3 to 4 hours each night. Nightmares always dragged me back to the moment the plane crashed, the screams, the sound of metal twisting. I always wore a Yankees baseball cap because it was Jacob's. He died right next to me. I became so negative that I once thought, God gave me life but took away all the happiness from me and my family. I couldn't work. The compensation from the airline hadn't been settled. My wife had to carry everything by working extra night shifts, and all I did was lie in a dark room and wonder why I was alive. I sought help from a psychiatrist. They called it survivor's guilt. It's considered a symptom within the PTSD group, post-traumatic stress disorder. The doctor suggested many methods, but they didn't help much. I have accepted the reality, but I haven't been able to escape it. Every time I close my eyes, I see the faces of the passengers who flew with me that day. The man in the row behind, clutching his brown leather briefcase. The young woman with headphones, nodding to the rhythm of the music. The silver-haired woman holding a newspaper. They all perished. I don't know why I remember their faces so clearly, even though I only glanced at them once. Every night, I dream of them looking at me. Their eyes hold no resentment, but they repeatedly ask, "Why are you still alive?" 6 months after the accident, I stepped out of my room for the first time to face my wife and son. My wife was cooking dinner, and my son was playing with toy cars on the rug. The house was decorated with colorful Christmas decorations. My nose stung as I realized my son was a little taller. My wife looked much thinner. When they saw me, they both ran over, concerned. Then I realized the terrible thing I had done. I had isolated myself from my wife and son for 6 months, but they were still here, always waiting and loving me. Unlike the families of the other 279 people, they didn't get the chance to welcome their loved ones home. I began to take my treatment more seriously, trying every way to return to my former life. Although I know it will never be completely the same, I am writing this story to remind myself it was not my fault. I am incredibly lucky that I survived, and I must cherish that luck. I must live well, live for Jacob too. Yesterday, my son asked, "Daddy, does it still hurt?" "Yes, son, but I will be okay." The story is inspired by a real-life accident. In June 2025, a serious aviation tragedy occurred in Ahmedabad, Gujarat, India, when an Air India Boeing 787 Dreamliner carrying over 240 passengers and crew members en route to London, England, crashed just minutes after takeoff. The accident killed almost everyone on board, but miraculously, only one person survived. Vishwash Kumar Ramesh, 40, a British national seated in seat 11A. Despite miraculously surviving what was considered a near-certain death, he suffered severe psychological trauma and was quickly transported to a civil hospital in India for treatment.
My name is Oliver. I have a friend named Adrian. We have known each other since college and were always very close. As the years went by, our lives and careers took us in different directions, so we didn't see each other often, but we always stayed in touch through social media. Adrian is currently very successful in the car business. He has always been handsome, and combined with his calm personality, I believe those traits were the key to his success. One day, Adrian messaged me to share some exciting news. He had just bought his third house, located in the suburbs. He invited me to a housewarming party to celebrate. I agreed immediately because it had been a long time since we had caught up in person. The party that night was very cozy. There weren't many guests, just about a dozen people, all old friends or close colleagues. Adrian greeted us with his usual elegance. The highlight of the party was the main course, which he had personally spent hours preparing. The aroma and texture of the meat were very unique. I had never tasted anything like it before, but it was delicious. When I asked about it, Adrian just gave a slight smile and said it was a private recipe and wouldn't reveal anything else. I wasn't the only one. Every guest was obsessed with that main dish. Adrian must have been very confident in his cooking because he prepared a massive amount. Plate after plate of meat was brought out. We ate, talked, and danced until the sun almost came up. The strange thing was that after that night, I completely lost contact with Adrian. He didn't reply to my texts, and his phone was always unreachable. I didn't worry too much, though, because I knew he traveled a lot for business. I assumed he had just gone overseas. Almost a year passed. While scrolling through social media, I suddenly saw a news headline that was being shared everywhere. Wanted. Suspect in suburban murder and body disposal. I was curious because the murder happened in the same neighborhood where Adrian lived. When I scrolled down to see the suspect's photo, I nearly fell out of my chair. It was Adrian. I swear I had to rub my eyes several times. I read the information and looked at the photo over and over again. I even went to the official website of the National News Agency to confirm it wasn't a fake story. It was real. I couldn't believe that a gentle, quiet, and successful man like Adrian could be a murderer. I read every detail of the article in the comments below. Someone mentioned that Adrian used to participate in disturbing online forums. I searched his name along with those keywords, followed a few anonymous accounts, and eventually discovered a private group. The members discussed sick fantasies involving violence and pleasure. It seemed they were all men. I started tracking old posts and found an account with a username identical to Adrian's Instagram handle. I was almost certain it was him. Adrian had been messaging another user for a long time, planning an in-person meeting. According to the discussions in that forum, the person he planned to meet was the victim. This victim was fully aware of what was going to happen. He had actually consented to being harmed to satisfy his own twisted experience. I was absolutely shocked by Adrian's true nature and the warped, depraved mindset of both him and the victim. But the true horror didn't stop there. I found a post by Adrian in that group where he described how he processed the body after the crime. He wrote about how to remove the scent and how to season the ingredients to turn them into elaborate dishes. He wrote about the thrill he felt inviting his closest friends over to eat the meat without them having any idea what it was. At that moment, my entire reality collapsed. The smell of the food from that housewarming party rushed back into my nose. I remembered the taste of the tender, rich meat that I had praised so highly. My heart hammered against my ribs, my hands shook, and I couldn't pull my eyes away from the screen. I felt my stomach twist violently. My head spun, and a wave of nausea hit me instantly. The meal I had complimented over and over again. That's what it was. I remembered eating so much that night. I even went back for seconds. This story is inspired by a real case. Following images and videos shared on social media, the police in Lang Son Province, Vietnam, investigated and arrested 57-year-old Duan Van Sang for murder. The victim, Nguyen Xuan Dat, had known Sang since 2020 through a private online group centered around twisted obsessions with the human body.
After committing the crime, the perpetrator committed the barbaric act of dismembering and cooking the victim's body to completely destroy evidence. Despite his sophisticated attempts to cover up the crime scene, the heinous act was discovered. On November 29th, the investigating agency issued a decision to prosecute and an arrest warrant for Don Van Sang to be severely punished according to the law.
My name is Daniel, and this happened when I was 12 years old. I truly believe that everything I experienced that year was real. It was Halloween night, and my parents let me stay up later than usual. After trick-or-treating around the neighborhood, I invited a few friends over to hang out. We were bored with the usual ghost stories and scary movies, so we decided to test our bravery with something more intense. We made a DIY Ouija board using some old scraps of wood from the backyard. We wrote out the letters with a marker and used a plastic bottle cap as the pointer. The whole group headed down to the basement, lit a single candle, and started the game. At first, we were just laughing and joking around, pretending to call up spirits to answer silly questions. But suddenly, the candle flame flickered wildly, and the bottle cap started moving on its own. It slid slowly but firmly across the letters. Not a single one of us would admit to pushing it. Panic quickly replaced our curiosity. My friends started blaming each other for cheating, and everyone scrambled upstairs and went home in a hurry. I was annoyed, so I tossed the board into a corner of the basement, assuming one of my friends was just playing a prank they were too scared to admit to. I didn't sleep well that night. Around midnight, I woke up suddenly with the feeling that someone was watching me. In the dim shadows of my room, I saw a small figure about my height standing perfectly still in the corner by the closet. My heart skipped a beat. I immediately pulled the covers over my head, telling myself I was just dreaming, and squeezed my eyes shut. But even in the pitch black under my blanket, a vivid image appeared in my mind. It was a boy about my age. He was hovering right in front of me, pressing his face close to mine. The terrifying part was his face. It was covered in long, deep gashes that overlapped like a net of torn flesh. The scars ran right across his eyes, making his gaze look hollow and full of pain. I wanted to scream, but my throat felt frozen. Then, he slowly reached out a cold hand and covered my eyes. I jolted awake, gasping for air like I had just escaped from drowning, only to realize it was morning. I tried to convince myself it was just a nightmare. But from that night on, strange things kept happening. At first, it was just faint noises in the middle of the night that I couldn't quite place. They always seemed to come from the hallway. I gathered my courage and opened the door a few times, but the hallway was always empty, and my parents' room was quiet with the lights off. The breaking point came one night while I was lying in bed. I felt the mattress next to me sink down, exactly as if someone had just sat or laid down beside me. I spun around in a fright, but there was absolutely nothing there. When I finally told my parents, they just laughed. They told me I was just obsessed with Halloween and the horror movies I had seen. They took away my ghost story books and banned me from going into the basement for a while. Since my parents didn't believe me, I decided to solve the mystery myself. I realized that everything had started after that Halloween night, after we had fought over the moving bottle cap.
One night, after my parents were fast asleep, I sneaked the board up to my room. After a few failed attempts, the cap suddenly jerked under my fingertips. I held my breath and wrote down the letters as it moved. S-A-M-U-E-L. It was a name. I asked who he was, and the cap began to move slowly again. Through short, broken answers, I learned that Samuel used to live in this very house. When I asked what happened to him, the cap stopped for a long time. Then, it began to move faster. As I read back what I had written down, a chill ran down my spine. On a night when he was home alone, an intruder had broken in. Samuel tried to hide in the basement, but he couldn't escape the killer. The man had cruelly taken his life and used a sharp object to slash his face before leaving. To this day, the killer has never been caught. He mentioned his parents, who had been investigative reporters. After his death, they were so devastated that they quit their jobs. After his funeral, they moved away immediately. The house sat abandoned for years until my family moved in. Surprisingly, I didn't feel scared anymore. It felt like I was talking to a friend. Samuel told me he had been lonely in the dark for so long. When he saw us using the board, he was happy. He just wanted a friend to talk to, but he realized his appearance had terrified me. The last message appeared, and I read it over and over. So glad I met you. After that, the bottle cap stopped moving completely. That night, I dreamed of a boy standing at the front door. His face was healed, and he looked very kind. He smiled and waved at me like a normal friend. I waved back, and his image slowly faded away. After that night, all the strange events in the house stopped for good.
My name is Jonathan. My family lived in an isolated house out in the suburbs. The house was surrounded by woods, with only a small gravel driveway leading out to the main road. The afternoon I got home was the exact moment the storm hit. Even though the local authorities had issued a severe weather warning, the sheer destructive power of it was still beyond my imagination. The wind howled relentlessly, and hail pounded against the roof and windows, creating a deafening racket. Luckily, my wife and kids were already visiting my mother-in-law's house, using the trip to stay clear of the storm. I cracked open a can of beer and sat in the living room, tracking the weather updates on TV. It was just me and my dog, Cooper, inside the house. Cooper was always terrified of thunder. Normally, the moment the wind picked up, he would run around looking for me. But tonight, after watching TV for a while, I suddenly realized I couldn't hear him anywhere. I called out his name a few times, but there was only silence. Right at that moment, the news channel suddenly cut to an emergency broadcast. A violent prison break just occurred at the state penitentiary 10 miles away. The notorious killer known as the Block C Monster has escaped. He was last seen hiding out in the wooded areas near suburban residential homes. The exact second the TV flashed the escaped convict's mugshot, a loud explosion boomed outside in the yard. The entire house plunged into total darkness. I rushed to grab my phone to use the flashlight, but the screen only flickered weakly once and died from a drained battery. I stood in the pitch black for a few seconds, waiting for my eyes to adjust. The storm outside grew even more violent, making the whole house shake. Then, cutting through the roaring wind, I heard a different sound. It was the chime of an iMessage notification, and it came from the second floor. The first thought that flashed through my mind was that my wife was texting my kid's iPad because she couldn't get through to my phone. I fumbled around to grab the emergency flashlight next to the TV stand and quickly headed up the stairs. When I reached the hallway, I froze. The master bedroom door was cracked open. I remembered very clearly that I had shut it tight after changing my clothes earlier. Just as my hand touched the doorknob, another sound made my blood run cold. the sound of heavy footsteps moving right behind the staircase behind me. But before I could react, the footsteps abruptly stopped. The space fell back into a heavy silence. In a state of pure panic, I ducked into the bedroom and backed up tight against the doorframe. I aimed my flashlight toward the stairs, trying to see what was out there, but nothing moved. When I swept my flashlight across the bedroom to find the iPad, my heart skipped a beat. I realized I wasn't alone in the room. A thin man with pale white skin was standing in the corner. He had a tight grip on Cooper. He looked up when my flashlight beam hit him, and I instantly recognized him. It was Ven. 2 years ago, he and I were involved in a horrific car accident. That tragedy took the lives of his wife and child. The accident was entirely Ven's fault, and the court cleared me of all charges. I did nothing wrong, but it was clear that his hatred for me had never faded. He looked at me, letting out a smug, satisfied smirk. Before I could process what was happening, a loud voice shouted from behind me, ordering me to freeze. A large, dark figure rushed straight into the room with a gun aimed right at us. In that chaotic split second, I was certain it was Ven's partner. I swung my heavy flashlight violently toward the dark figure to defend myself. Instantly, a loud blast rang out. My body jolted as a bullet slammed into my shoulder, followed by another one ripping into my stomach. Excruciating pain washed over me, and the room spun. I collapsed onto the floor. As I lay there gasping in pain, I saw Ven calmly let Cooper go. I heard the man who just shot me shout into his radio, "Target is down." That was when the horrifying truth hit me. The man who shot me wasn't Ven's accomplice at all. He was a police officer hunting down the escaped convict. When I turned my head to look at Ven, he was playing the part perfectly, acting like an innocent homeowner who had just escaped the hands of a dangerous criminal. Shouts and footsteps began to echo all around me. Officers called out to secure the scene and demanded an ambulance immediately. All those voices slowly drifted away. The last things I could sense before losing consciousness were the metallic smell of blood, Cooper's weak whimpering, and Ven's face hovering just behind the police officers. He was looking down at me with pure satisfaction. Then I drifted away into the dark. My name is Marcus. That summer, my parents signed me up for a Boy Scout camp that focused on wilderness survival skills. The camp was located in a pretty isolated valley, right near an old hydroelectric dam. On the very first day, all the campers had to hand over their phones and any other communication devices. I was pretty annoyed about it at first. No 15-year-old likes being completely cut off from the outside world. But eventually, I got used to it. During the day, we learned how to pitch tents, build fires, and navigate the woods. At night, we sat around the campfire and chatted with new friends. Overall, it was a lot of fun. About a week in, I noticed a few campers who were pretty rebellious. They frequently talked back or refused to follow the counselor's instructions. Every once in a while at night, I would see them being called out alone. Everyone said it was just the camp's way of handling discipline. During the second week, our whole group was taken down to the reservoir area near the dam for an overnight camping trip. At that exact time, the dam was undergoing maintenance, so the water level had dropped much lower than usual. While the group was touring the area, I got distracted, looking at some strange scenery. I accidentally drifted away from everyone else and ended up lost down by the lower section of the dam. As I was scrambling to find my way back, a horrific, foul stench suddenly hit my nose. My curiosity kicked in. I looked around and spotted a large, woven plastic sack snagged right on the water intake grate. I stepped closer because I wanted to see what was inside that could cause such an awful smell. When I got right up to it, I saw that the sack had several long rips in it. Through the first tear, I caught a glimpse of a piece of fabric with a very familiar color. I realized it was the exact same color as the scout uniforms we were wearing. My curiosity turned into a strange, unsettling feeling. I leaned down and strained my eyes to look through another tear near the top of the bag. My heart completely stopped when I saw a pair of dull, cloudy white eyes staring wide open, straight back at me. It was a human corpse. I screamed and bolted. I don't even remember how I ran. I just know that by the time I finally snapped out of it, I was back at the main campsite. The first person who saw me thought I was physically injured because my face was completely pale and I could barely form words. The camp coordinators took me into a private tent. They asked me a ton of questions. They asked for the exact location of the sack, whether I recognized the person inside, and if anyone else had seen it. I was too terrified to think, so I just answered whatever they asked. After that, they left me sitting alone in the tent to calm down. It wasn't until late in the afternoon that I finally saw the police arrive. The area near the dam was completely taped off. No one explained anything to the campers, but looking at the expressions on the adults' faces, everyone knew something incredibly serious had happened. From a distance, I watched the police load the sack into a vehicle and drive away. The next day, the summer camp was canceled. My parents came to pick me up that very morning. Once we got home, I told them everything that had happened. They worried the trauma would haunt me, so they took me to see a therapist. They also tried their best to shield me from any news related to the incident. For the first few days, the image of those eyes still popped up in my dreams from time to time. But eventually, life went back to normal. I didn't suffer from a prolonged mental crisis or insomnia. A few days later, still curious to know who the victim was, I snuck onto the computer to look for news online. But the articles were incredibly short. The coverage mostly just mentioned that a body had been discovered near a dam during routine maintenance. There was absolutely no mention of the victim wearing a uniform or being a student from the scout camp next door. I brought this up to my parents, but they thought I had been so panicked that I was misremembering things or letting my imagination run wild. Over time, I actually started to believe them, figured I remembered it wrong and stopped looking into it. Until recently, that is. While clearing out some old belongings, I accidentally found a group photo from that summer camp, and looking at that photo brought back a lot of strange details about that place. The more I look back on it, the more I realize how many things didn't make sense about that day. And that's when I started to form a terrifying theory about what really happened that summer. I remembered the strict rule about confiscating phones on day one. I remembered the stubborn kids being taken away alone for punishment at night. I remembered the sudden disappearance of a few campers whose absences were always brushed off by staff as their families picked them up early. And most of all, I remembered the highly suspicious, scanning reactions of the coordinators when I first reported what I found. Based on everything I can recall, I started to think that things weren't as simple as they seemed. The camp seizing our phones and banning us from wandering around might not have been just for building discipline. The victim inside that plastic sack could very well have been a kid who died from a punishment that went too far, or from physical abuse. Someone might have tried to get rid of the body by dumping it into the dam, expecting the current to carry it away. They probably thought the rushing water would wash the evidence far away or submerge it forever. But no one anticipated that the dam would go under maintenance that exact year, causing the water level to drop so rapidly and leaving the body trapped right against the trash rack. To this day, there is still no public information about who that victim was. I can't say for sure if my theory is exactly what happened. I don't have the evidence to prove a single thing. However, there is one detail that I am absolutely certain of today. The summer I turned 15, at the base of that drying dam, I saw a human body stuffed inside a sack. and the pure terror of that exact second has never completely faded from my memory. Hello, my name is Mialisha. This first story is about my mom's experience. When she was young, she went through a terrifying supernatural experience while she was sleeping. My mom was born and raised in Memphis, Tennessee. Back then, she was a big believer in paranormal things. One night, when she was about 14 or 15 years old, she was sharing a bedroom with her youngest sister, who is my aunt. At the time, my aunt was around 12 years old. In the middle of the night, my mom suddenly woke up because she heard her older sister in the next room having a quiet argument with her boyfriend. After a while, the argument ended and everything went quiet again. Not long after that, their bedroom door slowly opened. Because the room was pitch black, my mom couldn't clearly see who had just walked in. However, she instantly felt an unexplainable wave of fear. The figure walked over to the side of the bed, bent down over my mom, pulled the blanket off her, and gently tucked her sleeping little sister in with it. My mom squeezed her eyes shut and pretended to be asleep. She tried to nudge her sister to wake her up, but my aunt didn't react at all. After a moment, my mom gathered enough courage to open her eyes and look. She saw the entity walk right through the wall and disappear. As soon as it left, her sister finally woke up and asked irritably, "Why do you keep hitting me?" Nearly 30 years later, I had a different experience that immediately reminded me of my mom's story. At the time, I was about 16 or 17 years old and was staying over at my best friend's house. There's a detail I need to mention before telling this story. My friend is white. After her mother got a divorce, she married a black man. I am African American, and this detail makes the story a lot more unsettling. My friend's grandfather used to live in that house. According to the family, he was a man with very deep racial prejudices against black people. After he passed away, a lot of strange things started happening in the house. At night, everyone would often hear music coming from his old workspace down in the basement. The creepy part was that whenever anyone opened the basement door and took even a single step down the stairs, the music would instantly stop. That night, my friend and I were sleeping in her room like normal. In the middle of the night, I suddenly got a very strange feeling that forced me to open my eyes. When I looked up, I saw a terrifying shape hovering right over my friend. Its face was blurry like a thick fog, distorted and hard to make out. It leaned down toward my friend, looking exactly like it was kissing her forehead. Then suddenly, it snapped its head around. The movement was so fast that it jumped me. It stared directly at me. In that look, I felt nothing but absolute hatred and disgust. I swear to God. I immediately shut my eyes tight. In a total panic, I kept shaking, poking, and calling my friend to wake up, but she stayed fast asleep. It took a long time before she finally opened her eyes and asked me what was wrong. Right away, I demanded that she turn on every single light in the room. If it hadn't been around 2 a.m, I probably would have run all the way home. My house was only a few minutes walk right around the corner. The next morning, or more accurately, when my friend woke up, because I stayed awake the entire night, I told her everything I had seen. After listening to me, she just laughed and said, "Maybe that was my late grandpa kissing me goodnight." When she said that, I almost peed my pants. After that moment, I didn't even want to use the bathroom in that house anymore. The only thing on my mind was getting out of there as fast as possible. And honestly, I never went back to my best friend's house ever again. Though our relationship is still great to this day. Even though I didn't see the entity walk through a wall with my own eyes like my mom did years ago, the experience instantly brought her story back to me. The two events happened a generation apart in completely different places, but they had some eerie similarities. To this day, it remains one of the scariest experiences of my life.
My name is Terry. More than 15 years have passed since that night, but the memory remains vivid in my mind. Sometimes, I still find it hard to believe that it all actually happened. Lewis and I had been best friends since we were 10 years old. Lewis was cheerful, outgoing, and always ready to help others. What I admired most about him was his family. Lewis's family was well off. His parents were happy together, always spoke kindly to one another, and truly cared for their son. Every time I went to his house to play, I felt a warm atmosphere that my own family rarely had. When I was a kid, I thought Lewis was the luckiest person I knew. But during the second semester of 8th grade, Lewis changed. At first, it was just small signs. He started falling asleep in class. He had dark circles under his eyes, and his face always looked exhausted. His personality became quiet and withdrawn. He wasn't excited to talk about video games or basketball anymore. He would just sit silently staring at his desk. I asked him a few times if something was wrong, but he always brushed it off. Finally, after I kept pushing, he just said shortly, "Family stuff." Seeing his attitude, I didn't ask again. One weekend, Lewis unexpectedly invited me over for a sleepover. He said he wanted to play video games all night until we crashed, then sleep a long time to forget everything. I agreed immediately, hoping my presence would make him feel better. That night, we played game after game. Lewis seemed normal, even laughing occasionally when I kept losing, but I could still tell something was off. Around midnight, we both started to get exhausted. Lewis sprawled out on the floor and drifted off to sleep. I was thirsty, so I headed down to the kitchen. The house was quiet then. As I got near the living room, I saw the kitchen light was still on. At first, I thought someone else in the house was just getting a drink, but suddenly, I heard the sound of very quiet whispering and laughter. I peeked through the gap in the living room door. Lewis's mom was there, and she wasn't alone. A strange man was standing very close to her. At first, I only saw his large back, but when he turned toward the kitchen light to take a sip of water, the blood in my veins froze. It was my cousin. When I was little, he used to babysit me whenever my parents were busy. Everyone in the family praised him for being a decent, trustworthy guy. For years, he had been my role model for what a man should be. I ran back up to the room, my heart pounding like it was going to burst out of my chest. I stood frozen in the middle of the room, my hands shaking violently, not knowing how to face Lewis. While I was still in a panic, Lewis suddenly woke up. He mumbled that he was thirsty. In my state of shock, I didn't know how to stop him. Lewis walked down the stairs first, and I followed with an indescribable sense of dread. Near the top of the stairs, he stopped. From that spot, we could look straight down into the kitchen. Lewis definitely saw everything and stood there paralyzed. His face went pale, and his fists clenched tight. I had never seen him like that. He didn't have any outward reaction. It was just a heavy, suffocating silence. After a few seconds, Lewis turned and ran back to the room, grabbed his phone, and called his dad. He told him everything while his voice shook with rage. I couldn't do anything. I didn't dare admit that it was my cousin. I was sure that would only make things worse. About 20 minutes later, we heard a car pull up in front of the house. Lewis's dad burst inside in a blind fury. Immediately after, there was violent shouting between him and his wife, followed by the sound of furniture being shoved over. We just sat huddled in the room, not daring to step outside. Then suddenly, a gunshot rang out. Lewis and I looked at each other, our entire bodies going stiff. A second shot followed right after, then a third. Lewis tremblingly dialed 911, his voice completely breaking from panic. After the call ended, we just sat motionless in the room. No one dared to go downstairs. The silence was terrifying. The only sound was the frantic thumping of my heart. A while later, the sound of police sirens tore through the night. When the police knocked on the door and led us downstairs, what we saw was truly a nightmare. Furniture was knocked over everywhere. The coffee table was smashed with glass shards and decorations scattered across the floor. On the tile floor leading from the kitchen to the back door were messy smears of blood. Right in front of the back door, my cousin lay motionless on the floor, face down. His shirt was stained red, and he was surrounded by a large, spreading pool of blood. Lewis's mother was collapsed on the floor, her face white as a ghost, while his father was being held tightly by two officers as they took the gun from his hand. That chaotic scene haunts me to this day, especially the look in Lewis's eyes when he looked at his mother. I could clearly feel the hatred in his gaze. After that night, everything changed completely. Lewis's parents divorced shortly after the incident. His father went to prison, and his mother and he moved away from the neighborhood a few months later. I also suffered heavy psychological trauma from what happened. I was sad and missed Lewis very much. At first, we still texted each other, but over time, the distance grew, and we eventually lost touch. Many years have passed now. My life has moved on with work and new relationships. But occasionally, the memory of that night returns to my mind, and I have never forgotten Lewis. To this day, I still feel a deep regret that I couldn't say anything to Lewis that night. I lost the older brother figure I trusted most, and I lost the best friendship of my childhood.
My name is Turner. I'm a drifter from West Virginia, mostly getting around by hitchhiking, and I have a huge passion for skateboarding and surfing. I always live life to the fullest. I'm optimistic, I love life, and I'm always ready to help anyone in need. That day, I was standing on the shoulder of the highway, waving my hand to hitch a ride down to the beach area. A car pulled over. The driver was a huge, heavy-set guy, weighing about 300 pounds, and he looked to be around 50 or 60 years old. I don't remember his name. When I hopped into the passenger seat, he seemed pretty friendly. We chatted naturally, and he asked me a lot of questions about my life as a drifter. Things started to get weird when we drove past the town's recycling center. The man's attitude suddenly shifted. His voice dropped, becoming very emotional, and he unexpectedly confessed his secret from 30 years ago. He admitted to raping a 14-year-old girl during a business trip to the Virgin Islands. Just then, the car stopped at a red light. He burst into tears and suddenly turned around to hug me tightly. At first, I didn't really believe him and didn't pay much attention to his words. As the car started moving again, he began to ramble, claiming he realized he was Jesus Christ and had the right to do whatever he wanted. He offered to prove it, so I would believe him. Before I could even figure out what he was planning, he suddenly slammed the gas pedal all the way to the floor. The car surged forward, right at a pedestrian crosswalk, plowing straight into a man who was walking across the street. A loud, sickening crash echoed as he pinned the poor victim against the back of a truck ahead of us. I was in total shock, unable to believe what was happening right in front of my eyes. The trapped man wouldn't stop screaming in agony. Meanwhile, the guy sitting next to me was laughing hysterically. The rolls of fat on his neck were shaking with his savage laughter. I yelled at him, asking what kind of crazy stunt he was pulling, but he just kept laughing. When two women ran over to help the injured man, the driver growled with a look of pure rage. He threw his door open, hopped out of the car, rushed over, and suddenly grabbed one of the women in a tight hug. In the very next second, his hug turned into a chokehold, squeezing her neck with his giant hands. With the strength of a 300-pound madman, he could have easily taken her life in a heartbeat. I couldn't just sit there anymore. I quickly grabbed the car keys because I knew that if he got back in and started the engine, countless other people would be in grave danger. I jumped out of the car. Using my past rescue experience, I yelled at the crowd, telling them absolutely not to move the trapped man to prevent making his injuries worse. Then, without a single second of hesitation, I ran around behind the madman and pulled a small hatchet out of my backpack. I swung the hatchet, striking him repeatedly and fiercely in the head to free the woman who was actively suffocating. He was caught completely off guard, taking heavy consecutive blows straight to his head. Blood started pouring out, but he didn't panic at all, and not a single scream came out of his mouth. Terrifyingly, even with a deep, open wound on his head, he managed to stand straight up. He glared at me with pure hatred and cursed at me. The people around us told me to stop because the police were on their way. So, holding my bag in one hand and my hatchet in the other, I ran off in a different direction. I wanted to lure him into chasing me, pulling him away from the crowd so no one else would get hurt. He stumbled after me, the ragged wound on his head making him look exactly like a zombie, though you don't usually see an overweight zombie like him. Meanwhile, I actually enjoyed pulling out my skateboard to catch a few rides and practice my skills on the go. The police arrived quickly, rushing the injured man and woman to the emergency room. The obese zombie was also quickly rounded up and tackled. Once things settled down, the officers had me sit in the back of a police cruiser to take my statement and search my belongings. They realized I was homeless, but instead of arresting me for assault, they gave me back all my gear, including my hatchet, and let me go. The officers all assured me that I had done the right thing. My fierce resistance had saved the woman's life and stopped a mass tragedy. This actually wasn't the first time doing something like this. In the past, I had also stepped in to stop a man who was violently abusing a woman in an orchard. After the incident, a video of my interview spread all over the internet. I suddenly became a social media sensation and was praised everywhere as a hero. Reading through the comments, someone mentioned that after I struck him with the hatchet and ran, the madman had dragged himself in front of a nearby elementary school and engaged in a sick act in public before the police handcuffed him. It made me feel disgusted. If I could turn back time, I wish I had stopped him the exact moment he confessed to that horrific crime in the Virgin Islands. This story is inspired by a real-life event. Caleb Kai McGilvery was a Canadian drifter who became famous across America in 2013 after using a hatchet to save a woman from a dangerous psychopath. He was hailed as a hero after his interview video went viral across the internet. However, just a few months later, Kai was arrested for the murder of an attorney named Joseph Galfi in New Jersey. Kai's story became one of the most famous examples of an internet hero whose fame shattered overnight due to a controversial murder case.
My name is Ryan. At the time this happened, I was about 20 years old and had been working as a night shift cashier at a rest stop for nearly 3 years. It was a combination gas station and 7-Eleven located on the outskirts of town, surrounded by empty lots overgrown with weeds and bushes. During the day, the place was pretty normal, but at night it had a very different feel, especially on rainy nights. The shift that night was just me and Dave, a co-worker who was a few years older than me. He was pretty reckless, but he was also a hard worker. It had been pouring rain from evening until late into the night. The store was completely empty, so we just hung around doing random chores to kill time. Around midnight, Dave told me to take out the trash. That was part of my job anyway, so I just nodded and dragged the large trash bag out to the back of the parking lot. The dumpster was located in the darkest corner of the rest stop near the tree line in the back. Because of the rain, that area was much darker than usual. The yellow lights from the parking lot only reached it faintly. I used my shoulder to prop open the heavy dumpster lid and shined my flashlight inside. Right then, I jumped. Under the flickering light, I saw something that looked exactly like a pale white human arm sticking out from underneath a pile of black trash bags. At first, I thought it might be a part of a mannequin or some weird toy that someone had thrown away. But the more I looked, the more it looked like a real human arm. I was just about to bend down to get a closer look when I suddenly heard a shout behind me. "What the hell are you doing?" I startled so badly that I almost dropped my flashlight. When I turned around, I saw a middle-aged man standing only a few feet away from me. I hadn't heard him approach at all. He was wearing a dark raincoat and had a large, heavy build. Under the dim beam of my flashlight, his face looked angry and aggressive. I stammered and held up the trash bag in my hand, explaining that I was just out here to empty the garbage, but he didn't seem to care. He started yelling, cursing, and accusing me of flashing the light directly into his face. The more he talked, the more agitated he became. He gave me 3 seconds to get the hell out of there before he lost his mind. I quickly dropped the trash bag next to the dumpster and turned around to leave. At the time, I figured he was just an aggressive homeless guy or a truck driver on drugs looking for a fight. Even though I was still curious about what was inside the dumpster, I didn't want to become a target for an assault. So I retreated back inside the store. As soon as I walked back into the building, I told Dave everything. Dave seemed pretty curious, but was also highly skeptical. He asked me over and over if I was absolutely sure it was a real human arm. To be honest, at that moment, I wasn't entirely sure myself. I just knew that what I saw looked a lot like one. Dave finally told me to just wait for the rain to let up a bit, and then we would both go out and check it together. About half an hour later, when the rain began to clear, the two of us took our flashlights and went back out to check. The man was gone. We propped open the dumpster lid and began moving the trash bags around to inspect the inside. However, the spot was completely empty. There was no arm to be seen anywhere. Dave immediately turned to look at me, shook his head in disappointment, and told me I was definitely working too many night shifts and getting paranoid. I didn't like his answer, but there wasn't really any better explanation. A short time later, news broke in the next town over about a missing young woman. The case was all over the place. The police even brought a missing person flyer to tape right on the glass door of the store where I worked. I read through the flyer a few times but didn't pay much attention to it. I didn't know the girl, and I almost never went over to the neighboring town anyway, so I never connected that trash incident to this missing person case. Time passed, and around the middle of the following summer, by which time Dave had already quit, I was sitting and scrolling through my phone before my shift started when I saw an emergency news update from the local police. According to the report, the police had just arrested a suspect in the missing person case that had been ongoing for nearly a year. The victim was the exact same girl from the flyer. They determined she had been murdered by her boyfriend out of jealousy. I was still reading with a normal attitude until the suspect's mugshot popped up on the screen. In that exact second, my entire body went cold. It was the man in the raincoat I had encountered next to the dumpster that night. I recognized him instantly. There was absolutely no mistaking it. So, the arm in the trash that night, I hadn't been seeing things. It was real, and it was the body of the victim, and he had been trying to dispose of it. Perhaps when he saw me show up and almost discover it, he panicked and immediately moved the body somewhere else right after I ran back into the store. That was the reason why the arm had completely vanished by the time Dave and I returned. To this day, the thing that haunts me the most is not the fact that I saw a human corpse. It is the thought that I stood face to face with a murderer just a few feet away on that rainy night. I was so close to the truth that if I had just taken a few more steps or called the police right then, everything might have turned out completely different.
My name is Alden. I work as an Uber driver, and I mostly pull the night shift. The job gives me a pretty solid income, but the trade-off is the constant danger of driving down empty roads in the early hours of the morning. The terrifying story I'm about to tell you just happened a few days ago. That night started out as a completely normal shift, but the weather took a turn, and it began to rain heavily around the middle of my run, near 11 p.m. I was heading back toward the city center after dropping off a passenger in a remote suburb. As I reached a deserted stretch of road, moving at a pretty fast clip, a woman suddenly bolted out from the side of the street. I gasped, completely startled, and slammed my foot on the brakes. She was a middle-aged woman who looked totally disheveled and soaked from the rain. She ran right into the middle of the road, frantically waving her hands in absolute panic screaming for help. I pulled over and rolled my window down just an inch. The woman rushed up to the car, crying hysterically, begging me to give her a ride to the nearest hospital because her husband was suffering from severe abdominal pain. I glanced in the direction she was pointing and saw a man doubling over in pain inside a nearby bus shelter. At that moment, the only thing on my mind was that this was a medical emergency. I completely ignored all the red flags, quickly jumped out to help the woman lift her husband into the back seat, and hurried to get the couple to the nearest ER. After driving for about 10 minutes, the atmosphere inside the car suddenly fell into an eerie, unnatural silence. I realized that the woman's crying right next to me had completely stopped. She was totally silent. At the same time, I noticed the man in the back wasn't making a single groan anymore. Sensing that something was deeply wrong, I looked up at my rearview mirror. Under the dim dashboard lights, I saw that the man in the back had sat all the way up. His expression had completely changed. There wasn't a trace of pain on his face. He was staring directly at the back of my neck, wearing a cruel, wicked smirk. Before I could even process what was happening, I saw the man in the mirror raise a piece of wire, getting ready to strangle me from behind. At the exact same second, the woman in the passenger seat showed her true colors. She lunged across the console, trying to grab the steering wheel and take control of the car. In that split second between life and death, I immediately realized I had fallen into a trap set by a pair of carjackers. But I am not someone who gives up easily. Thanks to my large build and the physical stamina I developed from years of working out, I gripped the steering wheel tight to keep the car from spinning out. Since we were speeding down a slick, rain-soaked road, my first survival instinct was to stomp the brake pedal all the way to the floor. The tires shrieked violently against the slippery asphalt. Slamming on the brakes at that speed created a massive force of inertia, causing both of the attackers to completely lose their balance and fly forward. The man in the back smashed his face hard against the back of my seat, losing his grip on the wire. Not wanting to waste a single second while he was dazed, I channeled all my strength and drove my elbow backward, hitting him square in the face. The moment he shrieked in pain and let go completely, I used my other hand to shove the woman off me, popped my seatbelt, threw the driver's side door open, and dove straight out onto the highway. I ran for my life through the pouring rain, screaming at the top of my lungs for help. Luckily for me, this stretch of road was getting close to a busier part of town. After sprinting just a short distance, I spotted the headlights of a family car driving by. Seeing how panicked I was and how my clothes were completely torn up, they pulled over, took me in, and helped me dial 911. The police arrived at the scene very quickly. After giving them a full breakdown of what happened, I rode back with them to the spot where I had been attacked. But my car was completely gone, along with the two criminals. The next afternoon, I received an update from the detectives. After a widespread investigation combined with the specific descriptions and physical traits I provided, the police concluded that this was not a random mugging. They showed me a file on a serial killer couple who had been terrorizing the area, carrying out multiple carjackings, kidnappings, and brutal murders of drivers in the city over the past few days. They hadn't been caught yet. To this day, that couple is still on the loose. I am still dealing with the psychological trauma from that night, and I can't help but wonder how many more similar carjackings will happen before they are caught. I am incredibly grateful for the large physique my parents gave me, and I feel lucky that I've kept up a strict workout routine for so long. I know for a fact that not every victim would have been able to stay calm and have the physical strength to fight back and escape like I did. This story is inspired by the horrific crimes of Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris, notoriously known as the Toolbox Killers, one of America's most infamous serial killer duos. Before they graduated to kidnapping young women, the duo frequently used the exact method of hitchhiking or staged emergencies to rob and murder drivers on remote roads. Lawrence Bittaker was sentenced to death in 1981 and passed away from natural causes at San Quentin State Prison in December 2019. Roy Norris cut a plea deal to testify against Bittaker to avoid the death penalty, receiving a life sentence instead. He passed away in prison in February 2020. My name is Stella. This happened when I was 25, right around the time the COVID-19 pandemic first hit. Money was tight back then because of the tough economy, so I started buying wholesale liquidation pallets to flip for a profit. Each pallet was completely random, so you never really knew what was inside. On one occasion, I bought a pallet that mostly contained swimsuits, underwear, and socks for women and young girls. I listed the items individually, but I also posted an option to sell the entire lot to anyone who wanted it. Just a few minutes after posting the listing, I received a message from a middle-aged woman. Her profile picture showed a pleasant-looking lady in her late 50s or early 60s. She told me she wanted to buy the whole batch as a gift for her daughter and granddaughters who lived out of town. The conversation felt completely normal, and we agreed to meet the next day at a public parking lot to do the swap. On the day of the meetup, right as I was getting ready to leave, I suddenly received a message from a completely different account asking to push the time back by 30 minutes. This person explained that her old account had suddenly been locked, so she had to use a backup profile to contact me. Even though I felt a little uneasy about it, I brushed it off because I really wanted to make the sale. However, the deal started getting sketchier by the minute. The person kept changing the meeting spot. I refused and insisted that we stick to the original public location. Finally, the person offered to pay me an extra $100 if I would just deliver the items directly to their house. At that point, all I could focus on was the extra cash, so I agreed. The person set the time for around 5:30 p.m. and texted me the address. When I looked up the location on GPS, I hesitated for a moment. The destination was deep in a heavily wooded area, far away from any major residential neighborhoods. A wave of anxiety washed over me, but I told myself that people must still live out there, so I didn't think much more of it. By late afternoon, I was driving down the route provided by the map. The deeper I went, the more desolate the surroundings became. Since it was winter, the sun was setting very early. The moment I arrived at the address, my sense of dread spiked completely. The area was almost entirely isolated. There were only a few old, run-down houses scattered far apart from one another. My cell phone service dropped to a weak, flickering signal, and the road leading in was completely dead and empty. In the fading twilight, the whole place looked like it had been abandoned ages ago. Standing out there in the middle of nowhere, I finally realized I had made a massive mistake. I had come to this place completely alone, and I hadn't told a single soul where I was going. Fear kept me pinned to my seat. I stayed inside the car, cracked the window just a tiny bit, and called out loudly to see if anyone was coming to get the packages. After a moment, the front door of the house creaked open. Someone was standing right behind the door, but they wouldn't step outside. Their entire body was swallowed by the darkness of the house. Only a voice echoed out, asking if I could carry the heavy boxes inside for them. My survival instincts were screaming at me that if I crossed that threshold, I might never come back out. I immediately said no. The person inside stood perfectly still for a few seconds. Seeing my stubborn refusal, the person finally decided to step outside. And that was when I laid eyes on one of the most terrifying people I have ever met. I know it's wrong to judge someone based entirely on their looks, but this man genuinely made my skin crawl. He stood nearly 7 feet tall and was unnaturally incredibly gaunt. His face was completely hollowed out, and his hair was chopped in a jagged, messy way. Some sections were long and stringy, while other parts looked almost completely bald. His entire look and vibe instantly reminded me of a serial killer straight out of a horror movie. He slowly started walking toward my car. As I watched him approach, it suddenly hit me what I was actually selling: underwear, swimsuits, and socks meant for women and little girls. The panic hit me even harder. I couldn't think of a single normal reason why a man like him would want to buy those specific items. Horrifying thoughts started racing through my mind about the sick fetishes he might be hiding, or worse, even darker possibilities. When he reached the car, he asked me one more time to help him carry the boxes inside the house. There was absolutely no way I was going to do that. I quickly lied and told him that I had to get to my night shift right away and that my boyfriend was already waiting for me at my workplace. I added that if I was even a few minutes late, he would definitely start calling around to find me. I saw the muscles in the man's face twitch violently. He turned his head to look back down the empty dirt trail leading out of the woods, as if he were weighing his options. A few seconds later, a look of pure irritation washed over his face. Without saying another word, he yanked the heavy boxes out of my trunk himself, tossed a wad of cash through my cracked window, turned around, and walked straight back into the house. I slammed the window shut, hit the gas, and tore out of that place as fast as my car could go. It wasn't until I cleared the wooded area and my phone finally got a signal back that I felt like I could breathe normally again. On my way home, I pulled over and chatted with a local resident from that area to ask about the man. The resident told me that he was a notorious eccentric in the community. Everyone knew he had severe mental issues and exhibited highly erratic behavior. Even though he had never been convicted of a serious crime, most of the locals stayed far away from him because he felt incredibly dangerous. To this day, every time I look back on that night, I still believe I was a hair's breadth away from a situation turning horribly wrong. I still can't help but wonder if that man really bought those clothes for himself, or if he had a much more terrifying purpose in mind.
My name is Tyler. I was born in Washington, and I still live here today. There's a very deep scar on my right shoulder. Every time I look at it, I am reminded of the story that changed my life forever. It happened almost 10 years ago. Back then, I was a young guy who loved a free, easygoing, and somewhat reckless lifestyle. On my 23rd birthday, I decided to try something I had been curious about for a long time: marijuana. After that, I started using it regularly. Of course, I always kept it within the legal limits. I was also very open to casual relationships. I threw myself into parties and constantly used Tinder to hook up with strangers because I loved the thrill of meeting someone new. Then one day, I swiped right on Janet. Unlike the young, wild girls I usually met, Janet had a completely different vibe. She was 35, divorced, and raising a 4-year-old son on her own. Her bio sounded very honest and mature. That maturity didn't scare me off. Instead, it sparked my curiosity. I found it exciting because I had never had an experience with an older woman who had been married. Our texts flowed perfectly. Talking to Janet every day quickly became an essential habit for me. The real turning point in our connection was when Janet revealed that she also used weed regularly to cope with life's pressures. I can't even describe how excited I was. I immediately thought she was my true soulmate. I tried to ask Janet out a few times, but she always turned me down, saying she was too busy taking care of her little boy. Then, one weekend, she surprisingly messaged me first and invited me over to her place. She told me her ex-husband had picked up their son for the weekend, so the house would be completely quiet and private. I was beside myself with excitement. I got everything ready and made sure to bring some of my own stash to make the night even better. Janet's house was located in a quiet neighborhood. The inside was pretty cozy, though it was a little messy with children's toys scattered around. Meeting her in person, I noticed she looked much thinner and more exhausted than she did in her Tinder pictures. We sat and talked for a while. Everything was going great, and then we moved on to the main event. The room slowly filled with the scent of smoke, and we both drifted into a hazy high. A little later, Janet stood up and walked out of the room without saying a word. Since I was riding the high, I didn't pay much attention. A few minutes later, she came back, leaned in close, and started stroking my face, neck, and chest. I figured she wanted to hook up just as much as I did, so I completely relaxed. When I tried to take the lead and leaned in to kiss her, she instantly pulled away. I asked her if she was okay, but she just stared at me in absolute silence. Janet's eyes suddenly changed. The dreamy look from before was completely gone, replaced by an intense, confusing rage. She glared at me for a few seconds and then suddenly screamed, "Give him back to me!" Before I could even process what was happening, she lunged at me. A sharp, blinding pain ripped through my right shoulder, snapping me out of my high instantly. I shrieked in pain and shock as warm blood began pouring down my shoulder. That was when I realized Janet was clutching a pencil in her hand. Janet had turned into a completely different person. Her face was twisted with rage. Her eyes rolled back, showing only the whites, and she raised the pencil again, frantically trying to stab my neck. She kept muttering wild, meaningless words. My survival instinct kicked in. I used my left hand to block her arm and used all my strength to tackle her to the floor. I yanked the pencil out of her grip, threw it across the room, and slapped her hard across the face to snap her out of it. While she lay on the floor dazed, I clutched my bleeding shoulder and stumbled out the front door. With the last bit of strength, I yelled to the neighbors for help, asking them to call 911. A short while later, the police and an ambulance swarmed the scene. The officers restrained Janet and put her in handcuffs while she was in a state of total mental collapse. I was rushed straight to the hospital and got patched up, having lost a significant amount of blood. After the investigation, the police told me the truth behind the incident, and it left me completely stunned. The 4-year-old son Janet kept talking about on Tinder had actually died in a horrific car accident a month before she even met me. Unable to accept reality, Janet had completely isolated herself from the world, drowning in grief and turning to weed and other substances to numb her pain. According to the police report, using a high dose of marijuana that night, combined with her severe, long-term trauma, triggered an extreme episode of paranoia in her brain. In her drug-induced state, she looked at me, but hallucinated the person who had taken her child away. This led to her violent, uncontrollable outburst to get her son back. The court later found Janet not criminally responsible due to her mental state, and she was sent to a state psychiatric hospital for treatment. I never saw her again. I will never forget the madness in Janet's eyes that night, but I don't blame her. As I've grown older, I understand that it all came from the unbearable pain of losing the most precious thing in her life. I almost died on a blind date with a stranger. My name is Betty. This happened a year ago when I matched with a guy named Nathan on Tinder. After nearly a month of texting back and forth, realizing we had the exact same vibe, we decided to have our first date at a downtown bar. I already had a huge crush on him, so I was incredibly excited. When we finally met, I was completely shocked by Nathan's appearance. He was way better looking than his Tinder photos. even though his profile pictures were already amazing. Nathan had a slightly rugged, edgy look. His buzz cut and his heavily tattooed arms were the things that impressed me the most. Everything about him added up to the exact description of my dream guy. 3 hours of drinking and talking passed in the blink of an eye, because I was totally captivated by his every gesture and word. I really felt a spark on our very first date, and looking into Nathan's eyes, I had a strong feeling that he felt the same way. After a few flirty jokes, we decided to leave the bar to find a more private spot to continue the evening. Nathan drove me to a pretty deserted area on the edge of the city and pulled over. In the cramped space of the car, we looked at each other and shared a sweet first kiss. That was the last good moment of the night. While we were both caught up in the romantic haze, a loud crash suddenly echoed. A massive impact slammed straight into the back of our car, almost throwing us forward. Before I could even process what was happening, Nathan whipped his head around to look at the rearview mirror and cursed angrily. But instead of getting out to check the damage, he immediately threw the car into gear, slammed his foot on the gas pedal, and sped away. Terrified, I looked out the back window. A black pickup truck was also speeding up, tailing us closely. I kept asking Nathan what was going on, but he didn't answer. He just focused entirely on driving. A moment later, on top of the roaring engines, a series of deafening explosions started ringing out from behind us. I glanced in the mirror and my blood ran cold when I saw at least 3 men in the pickup truck. One was driving, while the other 2 leaned halfway out of the windows, repeatedly firing guns at our car. I was so scared I could barely breathe. My eyes were glued to the rearview mirror, while Nathan constantly swerved and maneuvered the car to dodge the bullets. At that moment, I truly believed I was going to die. If I didn't get shot to death, I figured I would die in a car crash or have a heart attack. Eventually, the pickup truck managed to pull up right alongside us. The gunfire temporarily stopped, and I could hear the men over there screaming at the top of their lungs. "Pull over, Nathan! You're a dead man, motherfucker!" Nathan called them bastards. He kept swerving to block a road, refusing to give the pickup truck a single chance to pass us. I squeezed my eyes shut in terror, gripped the handle tightly, and couldn't stop crying. The car rocked violently. The screech of grinding metal was piercingly loud as the pickup truck kept ramming into us, trying to force us off the road to get ahead. All I could do was grit my teeth and bear it. Then, a deafening blast went off right next to my ear. When I opened my eyes, I froze in absolute horror. A bullet was lodged right in the door on my side of the car. If it had been just a tiny bit off, it would have gone straight through my head. After about 20 minutes that felt like an entire century, the pickup truck finally slowed down, turned onto another road, and disappeared. Even so, Nathan didn't slow down at all. He kept flying at a high speed until we were deep into the downtown area. He pulled over to the curb, and both of us sat in total silence for a long time. I was still in deep shock. My legs were like jelly from the fear, so much so that I could only sit motionless in the passenger seat. Nathan turned to look at me. His face was stone cold. He lowered his voice, speaking in a dead, serious tone, emphasizing every single word. "Get out of the car and listen carefully. Do not talk to the police about tonight. The best thing you can do is forget everything that happened and don't try to find out anything about me if you want to stay alive." Nathan got out of the car first. Right at that moment, a taxi happened to drive by. He signaled for the cab to stop and told me to get in. I clumsily scrambled out of his car and lunged toward the waiting taxi. Right before I shut the door, Nathan looked at me one last time and said shortly, Nice meeting you.
I didn't answer. I got into the taxi and went straight home. I stayed awake almost the entire night trying to calm down. My mind was spinning with a million questions about who Nathan really was. Finally, I decided to text him to demand an explanation for everything. But Nathan's Tinder account had already vanished. Even now, a year later, I am still psychologically scarred by that horrific dating experience, and I haven't been able to truly open my heart to anyone else. I don't know who Nathan really was, but to be honest, alongside the lingering fear, there's still a small, faint trace of regret left inside me.
Ever since I was a little kid, I was used to packing up and moving every few months. Our family never stayed in one place for more than 3 to 6 months. When I was younger, I actually found it exciting to travel to so many different places. We lived in a big, multi-generational household. There was my grandma, my uncle's family, including my uncle, his wife, and my 2 cousins, and my own family, my parents and me. We always lived together as one tight-knit unit. But as I grew older, I started to hate this nomadic lifestyle. Eventually, my feelings turned from simple annoyance into a deep realization that my family was not normal. First of all, my grandma and my uncle were always treated with an extreme amount of respect by random people. Every now and then, incredibly expensive gifts would show up at our house for no reason at all. On top of that, complete strangers would know my name and my cousins' names perfectly. They would even use our family nicknames before we even knew who they were. Whenever I asked about it, the adults would just brush it off and say these people were old friends or longtime acquaintances. There was also a strict unspoken rule among the adults in the house. Whenever a major topic needed to be discussed, they would immediately switch to Spanish. They would purposely lower their voices so us kids couldn't understand a thing. At first I had a lot of questions, but over time, I just got used to it. I only let it go temporarily though. I could never completely shake the feelings of curiosity and frustration. It felt like I was being locked out of my own family. The turning point came when I was 17 years old. One night, I went down to the kitchen to get a glass of water when I heard my aunt pull my mom aside. Her voice sounded incredibly tense. Both of them immediately switched to Spanish, just like they always did. But what they didn't know was that I had been secretly teaching myself the language. I never expected that learning a new language would be the exact tool that exposed my family's deepest secret. Through their hushed conversation, I learned that one of my uncles had just been found dead on the exact day he was released from prison. The way my aunt spoke about his death was chillingly calm. She didn't sound shocked or heartbroken at all. I heard phrases like, if he got out of prison, it was only a matter of time before they found him. Then, they continued to whisper about how they have already started looking for people, and how he needs to get to the border before the weekend. The way they talked made me realize this wasn't an unexpected tragedy. It was something they had been mentally preparing for a very long time. My curiosity quickly turned into a dark obsession, and I began investigating my family's past on my own. At first, I just memorized the names I occasionally overheard in adult conversations. Then, I started looking them up online. I found several old news articles from Texas and Arizona covering my uncle's case. He had been arrested for his involvement in a massive drug smuggling ring, which was why it made the local news. As I traced our family roots even further back, to the time before my grandma packed up the family and immigrated from Mexico to the United States, I uncovered a bloody, horrific truth. For generations, my family had been deeply embedded in the criminal underworld of the Mexican drug cartels. My bloodline was tied to everything from large-scale drug trafficking to contract killings meant to silence witnesses. The names I used to hear whispered in the living room weren't just distant relatives. They were specific links in a massive criminal network. The man I always thought was just a strict, ordinary uncle was actually the person running this branch of the family on the US side. Less than a month after the night I eavesdropped on that conversation, horrific news began piling up. A few relatives over in Mexico were reported missing. Others were found dead. Some vanished completely without leaving a single trace, but this time I noticed the adults in the house weren't as calm as they tried to appear. My grandma would stay up all night long just to pray. My uncle became incredibly irritable, and he strictly forbade us kids from going outside by ourselves. For the first time in my life, I finally put all the pieces of the puzzle together. I understood that my family had never moved around randomly. We didn't move for work, and we didn't move for money. We were running for our lives. Every single move was an attempt to cut our tracks before someone could find our new location. The fact that the adults kept us in the dark and constantly forced us to pack up was actually their desperate way of protecting the kids from cartel hits. I don't know what my parents, my aunt, or my uncle did firsthand in the past. It is possible they never personally committed a crime. Or maybe they were just trying to survive a cycle they were born into and could never escape. But in the end, I realized none of that really matters anymore. In the eyes of the people hunting us, we are all part of the same bloodline. And sometimes, just carrying the wrong last name is enough to become a life sentence of running forever.
Since I was a child, I always grew up hearing the story that my father abandoned me right after I was born. In a way, that wasn't a lie, but the truth behind it was much more horrific and twisted than that. I grew up in a small town in the Midwest, and I got used to not having a father present at any of my major milestones. My mother rarely spoke about the past. Whenever I asked who my father was, she just said he wasn't worth mentioning. The rest of the family shared the exact same attitude whenever I brought him up. They just told me he was a worthless coward. The first crack in the story happened because of a slip of the tongue by my cousin during a visit. He looked at my dark hair and mentioned that I looked like my mom because your dad was blonde and your mom has dark hair. That comment caught my attention immediately. I remembered very clearly that everyone else had always told me my father had dark hair. Aside from that, there was another detail that had always made me feel vaguely out of place as a kid. My last name was Smith, while everyone else in the family shared a completely different last name. When I first started noticing this difference, my grandmother explained that after my father left, my mother was so heartbroken and filled with hatred that she just flipped through a baby name book, picked a random last name, and wrote Smith on my paperwork. That explanation was enough to satisfy me when I was little. But after my cousin's comment, it started to sound completely fake. I began paying much closer attention to the stories about my father and my true identity. Everything finally blew up when I turned 20 and began the process of enlisting in the military. To complete my file, I was required to submit the original copy of my birth certificate. The moment I held that legal document in my hands, I froze completely. In the section for father's information, a name was printed clearly and sharply: Alexander Smith. I was stunned. It turned out my last name was Smith simply because it was his last name, not because of some random baby name book. My family had lied to me. I didn't confront them right away. The birth certificate gave me a name, Alexander Smith, and the location where I was born. That was enough to narrow things down. For the next few days, my eyes were practically glued to my computer screen as I tracked public databases, civil records, court documents, and background check websites. Alexander Smith is a very common name, but once I filtered it by age and location, the list got much shorter. Then, I found a record that made my hand freeze on the mouse. This man had lived right in my family's area at the exact time I was born. The archived files showed that Alexander Smith was not his birth name. It was a name he legally adopted after immigrating to the United States from Russia. Right then, I suddenly remembered a DNA kit I had done a few years ago to check my ancestry. The results showed that most of my heritage came from Eastern Europe, with my Russian ancestry coming in at a massive 70%. My grandmother was Russian. I had always known that. But if I only inherited it from her side, the percentage couldn't possibly be that high because my mother was biracial. From my grandmother to me, that number should have only been around 25%. There was only one possible explanation. My father was Russian too. The final piece of evidence that made me 100% certain this man was my father also pushed me into a state of extreme psychological trauma. In the section listing Alexander Smith's biological mother, the name read clearly, Natasha Kelovich. And Natasha Kelovich was my grandmother's maiden name. I stared at that name until the letters began to blur. If these documents were correct, Alexander Smith wasn't just my biological father. He was also my grandmother's son, meaning he was my mother's brother. That evening, I laid out everything I had discovered right in front of my family. This time, nobody tried to deny it. My mother could only sit there and sob, unable to utter a single word. Finally, my uncle spoke up, his voice catching heavily in his throat. Alexander really was my biological father, the son of my grandmother's first marriage. I was the product of abuse, a horrific crime that the entire family had tried to bury for years out of pure shame and trauma. Right after I was born, he hated my very existence. One night, when I was only a few days old, he used a pillow to cover my face to get rid of me. Luckily, my uncle caught him just in time and tackled him away. He escaped into the night, but my family immediately called the police and a warrant was issued for his arrest. A few weeks later, Alexander came back in the middle of the night. Since his plan to kill me had been discovered and stopped by the family, he didn't give up. Instead, he turned to an even more brutal plan, erasing everyone else. He set fire to our house. The fire quickly raged out of control, spreading to the neighbor's house and taking the life of an elderly woman. After that incident, he was caught, sentenced to life in prison, and eventually died behind bars. I sat there listening to the whole story, completely numb, not knowing how to react. Every word felt like a physical blow to my head, leaving me dizzy. I looked at the faces of the people who had raised me. I looked at my mother, who had endured such horrific suffering and trauma, but still chose to give birth to me. In a single evening, everything I thought I knew about myself was stripped away. I understood why they chose to hide the truth, but that understanding didn't make the pain any easier to bear. My uncle told me the family had planned to write me a letter explaining everything once I officially deployed with the military. They wanted me to be strong enough to handle the truth, but I had found it out on my own first. So it turned out I had two versions of a father to process. One was the man I thought abandoned my mom and me when I was a baby. The other was the monster who abused my mother and tried to murder me the moment I came into the world. Since that day, I don't dream about an absent father anymore. I dream about a white pillow coming down over my face, and in the darkness, a blonde man standing over me, staring down with pure hatred in his eyes.
My name is Jason, and I'm a freelance graphic designer living in Los Angeles. To give you a little background, I've always had a very casual and open-minded view on relationships. I lived that lifestyle for years until I was forced to learn a very expensive lesson. Because my work is pretty isolating, mostly working from home, I often use dating apps to find short-term flings. If things went well, they might last a bit longer, but never more than 3 months. Everything started getting messy when I met a girl named Maddie. She was attractive, confident, and a great talker. I found myself getting swept up in her before I even realized it. Maddie was probably the first person to actually make me feel that excited in a long time. After texting for a few days on Tinder, we decided to meet up at a small bar in downtown LA. The date was a blast.
Maddie was even more forward and open than I expected. Everything went exactly according to plan when I brought her back to my apartment. While things were getting intense and passionate, Maddie suddenly put something small, smooth, and slightly bitter into my mouth. My brain was foggy with excitement, so I just assumed it was some kind of party pill or something to enhance the night. Without a second thought, I swallowed it. That night was physically exhausting. I fell into a deep sleep near dawn, completely wiped out. The next morning, I woke up alone in my apartment. Maddie was gone. Usually I'm the one who ends things and leaves, but this time, I was the one left behind. I tried to shift my position in bed and immediately felt my whole body aching. When I tried to get up, a wave of strange symptoms hit me. Dizziness, nausea, a racing heart, and a burning sensation spreading through my skin. I had to grab onto the bedpost, gasping for air in total panic. Right then, my phone buzzed with a text from Maddie. When I opened it, it became even harder to breathe. She told me that I had swallowed something special, and if I didn't want to die in agony, I had to follow her instructions. I immediately remembered the pill she gave me the night before and cursed under my breath. I couldn't accept being backed into a corner or forced to do what someone else wanted. Besides, she was talking crazy, and I didn't fully understand what she meant. When I didn't reply right away, she sent a string of messages describing my symptoms in perfect detail. She warned me that things would only get worse without the antidote. She demanded a large sum of money and told me not to call the police. This crazy woman made me furious. I shot back an angry text filled with insults, telling her to stop this insane game. I threw my phone aside and tried to head to the shower to clear my head, but after only a few steps, a massive wave of vertigo sent me crashing to the floor. I thought about calling friends for help, but what would I even say? That a one-night stand drugged me and was now blackmailing me? No way. That wasn't the cool guy image I had spent years building. I searched online for toxins that caused my symptoms, but I couldn't find a perfect match. As noon approached, my limbs started shaking uncontrollably. I was drenched in a cold sweat and my strength was fading fast. Thinking I was actually about to die, I shiveringly texted Maddie that I would pay. I had to drag my soulless body to an ATM, cursing my own stupidity and lifestyle the entire time. After withdrawing the cash, I took it to the drop-off point, an abandoned parking lot on the outskirts of town. I left the bag in the designated spot. Before leaving, I couldn't help but scream out a curse, feeling bitter that I was so helpless. I felt my body giving out. I felt like death was knocking on my door, yet the antidote still hadn't been sent. Finally, I threw away all my pride and called her. As soon as Maddie picked up, I broke down in tears. I begged her to send the cure because I didn't want to die.
She told me it was just a prescription medication used to lower blood sugar.
Then she hung up and blocked me. I sat there in the middle of the parking lot, stunned. My mind was blank. After a moment, I used the last of my energy to look up hypoglycemia medication. It turns out that when a healthy person takes this medicine, it crashes their blood sugar to dangerously low levels. This causes a list of symptoms: shaking, sweating, rapid heartbeat, dizziness, and most importantly, extreme anxiety and restlessness. I'd been scammed perfectly. Maddie didn't use a deadly poison. She used my own fear and lack of knowledge to rob me. I lost a huge amount of money, not because of a toxin, but because of a cheap pill and the price of being reckless. I was more angry at myself than I was at the con artist. It's true what they say. Stupidity always comes with a price tag. I learned a deep lesson that day. I swore to myself I would never do one-night stands or casual flings ever again. If you're planning on swiping on Tinder tonight, please remember my story. I was completely clueless when I helped my grandma cover a dead body with dirt. My name is Claire. When I was a kid, my parents sent me to my grandparents' house in the suburbs for a few weeks almost every summer. I absolutely loved it there. My grandma was obsessed with gardening. The backyard was always bursting with flowers, especially roses. My grandpa usually just sat on the porch, watching her tend to the plants, only helping out every once in a while. In my memory, everything about that place was incredibly peaceful. That was until the summer I turned 12. That year, before I went down to visit, my parents told me that my grandparents weren't living together anymore. I overheard them whispering that my grandpa had found someone else and walked out. Grandma was heartbroken, but when I arrived, she acted completely normal, just like any other year. In fact, the garden looked even more beautiful than I remembered. The rose bushes were blooming so thick that they practically hid the black fence. One afternoon, I went out to the garden to help Grandma plant some new roses. While I was digging up the dirt, I saw her dragging a pretty heavy burlap sack toward the back of the garden. A deep pit had already been dug there. Curious, I ran over and asked her what it was. She just smiled and told me it was some fertilizer Grandpa had left behind. She said it was great for the plants, but it smelled a bit funky. I didn't think twice about it. I helped her push the sack into the pit, and together we covered it with dirt. But a few days later, I started noticing a foul odor around the house. At first, it was just a faint whiff, but as the weather got hotter, the smell got worse. It was especially strong near the back corner of the garden. I even complained to Grandma that the smell was unbearable. She told me it was just the typical scent of organic fertilizer, and that this specific kind always smelled that way. After a heavy rainstorm, the odor died down a bit, but it didn't go away completely. It just became damp and metallic. Grandma started keeping the back windows tightly shut so the smell wouldn't drift inside. Eventually, I got used to it and stopped paying attention. Aside from that, it was still a very fun summer. The roses bloomed beautifully that year. They were much bigger and more vibrant than in any other year. I even asked Grandma if I could set up a tent and camp out in the yard because I loved the garden so much. Over the next few years, I kept up the tradition of staying with Grandma every summer to help her garden. But the roses never bloomed as big or as beautiful as they did during that one summer. By the time I went off to college, Grandma passed away from old age. After she died, the house sat empty. The garden slowly withered away. The flowers died off, and the weeds completely took over the yard. I stopped going back there for the summers. Years later, now that I was an adult, my mom called me out of the blue. She said the family was planning to sell Grandma's house. She told me that if I wanted to keep any keepsakes, I should go take a look soon, because the house would be gone before long. So, that weekend, I drove back to the place where I had spent so many childhood summers. While packing things up, I found Grandma's old gardening journal. Inside, she had written detailed notes on how to care for each type of rose. Looking out the window at the overgrown yard, I missed her terribly. I decided right then to clean up the garden one last time. That afternoon, I went to the store, bought some gardening tools, and started tilling the dirt at the very back of the yard. As I was digging, my shovel suddenly struck something hard underneath. At first, I assumed it was just a rock, but when I bent down and brushed the dirt away, I saw an unusually long off-white object. I picked it up to get a closer look, and a cold shiver ran through my body. It looked exactly like a human bone. My heart started racing. I kept digging around the area, and before long, the shape of a human skull appeared in the dirt. I stood there frozen in shock for a long time before pulling out my phone to call the police. The backyard was quickly taped off as a crime scene. While the detectives questioned me and excavated the back corner of the garden, the memories of that summer when I was 12 came rushing back. This was the exact spot where I had stood next to Grandma, helping her shovel dirt over the heavy sack she claimed was fertilizer. The realization turned my blood to ice, and I immediately told the police everything. That same day, my parents rushed down to the suburbs after hearing that human remains had been found in the garden. No one in the family talked much over the next few days while we waited for the forensics report. Everyone had a sinking feeling that whatever was about to be revealed would be horrific. And it was. Eventually, the investigation confirmed that the skeleton buried in the corner of the yard belonged to my grandpa. The autopsy showed that Grandpa had died from a severe skull fracture caused by blunt force trauma. The timeline matched up perfectly with the exact time they had separated, and when Grandma claimed he had walked out on her. Based on the evidence dug up from the yard, the police concluded that Grandma had murdered Grandpa and buried his body in the backyard to cover up her crime. But since Grandma had already passed away years ago, the case was officially closed. The part that haunts me the most isn't just that my sweet Grandma was a killer. It is the fact that during the entire summer I was 12, I had cluelessly helped her bury my grandpa in that garden. And every day after that, I ran around, played games, and admired the beautiful roses growing right on top of his grave, completely unaware of what was hidden just beneath my feet.
Back in elementary school, I was really close friends with Joseph. He was my classmate, and we lived in the same neighborhood. It was a Friday. After school ended, we snuck away from our parents and went into the thick pine forest behind the school to play hide and seek. That forest was strictly off limits for kids, but to us back then, the more something was banned, the more exciting it became. After searching for a pretty long time, it started to get dark. The air around me grew cold, and I began to lose my cool and feel scared. I yelled out at the top of my lungs that I gave up, and I told him to come out so we could go home. I shouted several times, but nobody answered. I figured I was being pranked. I thought Joseph had probably run home ahead of me, leaving me all by myself. My fear turned into anger. I turned around and stomped back home, feeling incredibly bitter because my friend had ditched me. That frustration didn't last very long. That exact same evening, my parents suddenly announced that we were going on a camping trip for the weekend. So, over that weekend, I was absolutely thrilled. I enjoyed the trip and completely forgot about the bitterness from the hide-and-seek game with Joseph. At the start of the next week, I went back to school and saw a big crowd gathering right by the front gate. I recognized Joseph's mom. Her face looked completely exhausted and her eyes were swollen from crying. She was handing out missing person flyers to anyone passing by. As I walked past, she suddenly noticed me and blocked my path. She dropped to her knees right in front of me, bursting into tears, and asked if I knew where Joseph was. She told me he hadn't come home since Friday afternoon. I was completely shocked when I heard the news. But looking into her eyes, I only felt fear. I knew we had broken the rules by going into the woods. My parents were very strict, and I knew I would get grounded or spanked for disobeying them. I didn't dare to look at Joseph's mom anymore. I lied straight to her face, saying I didn't know anything because I had been away camping all weekend. As soon as I said that, I yanked my hand away from her grip and dashed into my classroom. Throughout that entire day, a heavy feeling of anxiety hung over me. I couldn't focus on a single school lesson. The second school let out, I rushed straight into the forest to look for Joseph. I only had one thought in my head. If Joseph really never went home, then he had to still be inside this forest. I had to find him myself to fix my mistake, so nobody would ever find out that I lied. I ran non-stop to the exact area where we had played hide and seek the other day and searched all around. Joseph still wasn't there, but today I finally noticed something new. A large section of the ground had suffered a massive landslide, completely burying the deep hollow tree roots where we usually love to hide. I had no idea when the landslide had actually happened. I didn't dare to stay there for another second and ran all the way home. I made up my mind right then to never tell a single adult what happened, and Joseph was never found. Years later, even when I moved on to middle school and then high school, I still felt a deep eating guilt every time I saw Joseph's mom. I hated myself for not telling the truth, that Joseph and I were playing in the forest behind the school on the exact day he went missing. She kept searching faithfully for many years. She would hold his photo and stand right in front of the school gate or on random street corners, desperately looking for her son. My name is Bethany, and this is the story of my harmonious family. To be clear, the family I'm talking about here is only my mother's side of the family. Throughout my childhood, I always felt a suffocating, forced atmosphere whenever my family gathered for parties or holidays. One important detail is that my parents got divorced when I was 6 years old. However, my dad still showed up at all of our family get-togethers. I don't remember him using those gatherings as an opportunity to be close to me. All that remains in my childhood memories is how uncomfortable everyone in the house looked, and the completely cold, detached expression on my mom's face. But the most noticeable thing of all was the attitude of my Aunt Dana, my mom's younger sister. My aunt always found every possible excuse to avoid my dad. She would never stand in the same room or lock eyes with him. Even though I was way too young back then to understand, her extreme avoidance always made me wonder. And those questions were finally answered when I was 12 years old. That day, I went over to my aunt's house to hang out with my cousin, who is her daughter and a year younger than me. I was staying over for a sleepover. For context, my aunt was a single mother. Since my aunt had to work the night shift, my cousin and I started coming up with all kinds of mischievous games to pass the time. My cousin came up with the idea to play detective, so we began rummaging through the whole house to find evidence left by a suspect. We had no idea that we were about to uncover evidence that would expose a real-life criminal. After finishing our search in the living room, the two of us excitedly moved into my aunt's bedroom. We ran through her dresser drawers, thinking we would find some cool makeup to play with, but instead, we accidentally pulled out a neatly folded piece of paper hidden deep at the very bottom of the wardrobe. Naturally, curiosity got the best of us. We stopped looking for cosmetics and opened it up to read right away. To this day, I can't remember every single word written in that letter, but the main point was about how heartbroken and exhausted my aunt was. She wrote that she could no longer bear the horrific trauma she was carrying. The most shocking part was a line where she stated that my dad was the one who had destroyed her life. The letter ended with a desperate final goodbye to the family. I was absolutely terrified, and my cousin started sobbing hysterically because we both thought my aunt was about to end her life. So, in the middle of the night, we held hands and ran all the way to my house with the letter to break the news to my mom and grandma. I will never forget the expressions on their faces when they read that note. I had never seen them so deeply shaken and hysterical. My grandma immediately called my aunt, demanding that she end her shift and come home right that second. When my aunt arrived, the confrontation took place at our house. My mom told me to take my cousin into the bedroom and go to sleep. I did what I was told and led my cousin to the room. But we didn't go to sleep. Instead, we pressed our ears flat against the bedroom door to eavesdrop on the adults. After a few minutes, I froze in fear as I heard my aunt burst into loud, agonizing wails. It turned out that a few years prior, right after my parents had separated, my mom left the house one afternoon. My aunt didn't know my mom was out and came over to visit. That was when the tragedy happened. My dad assaulted her right there in our family home. What was even more sickening was that he intentionally infected her with HIV and hepatitis B. Once the truth came out, my grandma and my mom were completely furious. The very next day, they called an emergency family meeting to confront my dad. Looking back on it now, his calm, indifferent attitude and the story he told are the most disgusting things I have ever witnessed. Faced with my family's rage, he openly admitted that he had no personal grudge against my aunt, and he hadn't even been sick before. It all started from a dare by one of his drug addict friends. The friend challenged him to play a twisted game of life and death, daring him to contract the diseases and use them to ruin someone else's life. So, my dad purposefully got himself infected by that friend. My aunt just happened to be a random target when he felt the urge to act. Hearing his explanation, my grandma was in such shock that her legs gave out and she collapsed. My family quickly called the police to have him arrested, determined to make him pay a heavy price. Finally, I understood the reason behind my aunt's extreme avoidance whenever she was in the same room as my dad. The story ended with that monstrous man I called my father facing a long prison sentence for sexual assault and intentionally transmitting dangerous diseases to another person, but my family was completely shattered. My aunt received a lot of love and support from everyone, but she could never escape the trauma and psychological torture. She has to live on medication and in constant fear for the rest of her life. My cousin was also heavily traumatized after finding out the truth. As for me, I feel a deep sense of horror toward the man who gave me life. How could he do something so evil to the people closest to him, the people who were supposed to be his family? Did he not possess even a single drop of human emotion? Or did the drug addiction completely destroy his humanity? I have never gone to visit him in prison, and I never want to do it for as long as I live.
My name is Olivia. This happened a few months ago when I agreed to house sit and watch a dog named Charlie for a friend who was away on business trip in rural Kentucky. The house was pretty isolated, surrounded mostly by a large lawn and a few rows of low trees. It was so quiet at night that you could barely hear anything except the sound of crickets. When I first arrived, I thought this would be a nice, relaxing couple of days, but in the end, it turned into one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. It all started with Charlie's dog bed. On the first night, I noticed his bed was a bit dirty after he spent the afternoon running around the yard, so I took it down to wash it. I remember very clearly that after the washing machine finished, I personally transferred it to the dryer, pushed the start button, and then led Charlie upstairs to the bedroom. However, when I went downstairs the next morning, I found the dog bed sitting soaking wet inside the washing machine, and the door was propped open. At the time, I just thought it was a little weird. I asked myself, wait, did I remember that wrong last night? I figured I was just being absent-minded, so I started the wash cycle again and didn't think much else of it. By that evening, things started to get even stranger. I had just finished making dinner and was carrying the food from the kitchen to the living room when I almost tripped. The large coffee table had been dragged out and was completely blocking the walkway. On top of that, an end table had been pushed right up against the front door, looking exactly like someone had intentionally barricaded the exit. Charlie is a small dog. There was no way he could ever push such heavy pieces of furniture. That was the moment I started to feel a real sense of dread. I went around and checked every single window and door, but everything was still locked tight from the inside. There was obviously no one in the house except me and Charlie, but I couldn't shake a horrible feeling that a pair of eyes was watching me. I took Charlie into the bedroom, locked the door behind us, and called the police. 2 officers arrived and searched around the property, but they found no signs of a break-in. Before leaving, the older officer warned me to be careful. He mentioned that the local police were currently hunting for a fugitive known as the Gnome Bandit. I felt worried, but I tried to reassure myself that everything would be fine. After all, the police had just checked the whole place. The next morning, as soon as I stepped onto the stairs, my heart dropped. Charlie's dog bed was sitting inside the washing machine yet again. This time, I knew for an absolute fact that my memory wasn't playing tricks on me. Walking into the kitchen, I found several cabinets flung open and things thrown all over the place. At this point, it was no longer a coincidence. Someone was definitely inside the house with me. I immediately called the police for the second time, but once again, they found nothing. No forced entry, no footprints, and no obvious clues. One of the officers even asked if I had been under a lot of stress lately, or if I had a history of sleepwalking. To be honest, I started to question my own sanity at that point. Everything felt so incredibly real, but there was zero proof to back it up. I barely slept at all that night. I kept hearing faint scratching noises coming from the ceiling. I tried to tell myself I was just imagining things. I thought about calling my friend, but she was away on an important business trip, and I didn't want to cause her to panic. The next morning, the moment I opened the bedroom door, I nearly fainted. The entire hallway was completely blocked off by tables, chairs, and other furniture, all stacked on top of each other like a twisted maze. Charlie started barking violently. He kept staring straight up at the ceiling. Right then, I knew without a doubt that something was horribly wrong. I pulled out my phone to record everything and called the police for the third time. This time, they performed a much more thorough search. They checked the attic, the crawl spaces, and even the hollow spaces inside the walls. After nearly an hour, an officer finally discovered a small hidden crawl space concealed behind an old wooden panel in the attic. And inside that space, there was actually a person. It was a thin, filthy man with messy, matted hair and wild, bloodshot eyes. He was crouching in that dark hole, surrounded by a few empty cans of leftover food. It was the known bandit the police had been tracking down for weeks. As he was handcuffed and led downstairs, he didn't look scared at all. Instead, he stared directly into my eyes and flashed a sick, twisted smile. At the police station, he confessed that he initially started moving the furniture just to scare me into abandoning the house so he could have the hideout all to himself. But after a while, watching me panic, stress out, and second-guess myself gave him a twisted thrill. He enjoyed the hide-and-seek aspect so much that he decided to keep pushing the game further. To this day, I still can't shake the pure terror of that realization. For 3 days and 3 nights, that psychopath was living right above my head, silently watching my every move through the cracks in the ceiling while I had absolutely no idea.
My name is Tyler. This whole situation started because of my second girlfriend. She is a Lexus IS 300 that I bought when I was 22, and I took incredibly good care of her. But there was one major inconvenience. My apartment complex was completely out of parking spaces. Because of that, I was forced to park in an isolated dirt lot a few hundred yards away from my building. Since a few other people parked there too, I felt somewhat safe about it. About a week after I bought the car, my phone started getting non-stop notifications from my dash cam late at night. The alerts always said, "Unusual motion detected." Every single time it happened, I would jump out of bed and open the app to check the live feed, but I never saw anything actually suspicious. This kept happening for several nights in a row, completely ruining my sleep. I started getting really annoyed, but my car was my prized possession, so I couldn't just ignore it. One night, I even went out to the parking lot myself and sat there watching until midnight, but I still didn't see anything sketchy. Eventually, I figured the dash cam was just glitching out. I decided I would take it in to get looked at,
and stopped stressing over it. Then, one late afternoon, I had a dinner date with my actual girlfriend. Just as I was pulling out of the parking lot to go pick her up, a man suddenly ran up to my window asking for help. After asking a few questions to confirm that this was my car, he told me that someone had sideswiped his vehicle and driven off. He asked if he could look at my dashcam footage to help find the runner. It sounded completely reasonable, and it wouldn't take much time, so I agreed. I let him step into the passenger seat so we could look at the video playback together. While I was tapping through the touchscreen, the sudden silence inside the car gave me a horrible gut feeling. I stopped what I was doing and turned to look at him. The expression on his face had completely changed. Before I even had a chance to react, he swung his arm and struck me hard on the back of my neck, knocking me out instantly. I have no idea how much time passed, but I finally woke up inside an abandoned warehouse. The place smelled heavily of mold and was covered in thick dust. While I was gritting my teeth through the pain, trying to break free from the ropes tying me up, I heard police sirens blaring outside. As it turned out, the kidnapper hadn't even had the chance to move me very far before getting busted. After I was safely rescued and brought back home, my girlfriend told me what had happened. Since I was way past our date time and my phone was going straight to voicemail, she started to panic. She opened the dashcam app to see if my car was on the move, and that was when she discovered that all the motion alerts had been backed up to her phone. My girlfriend noticed something was seriously wrong in the videos, especially the audio conversation between me and that man in the latest clip. She immediately called 911. Luckily, my phone was still in my pocket, and my location sharing feature with her was still turned on. Using the GPS signal, the police quickly tracked me down to the abandoned warehouse and rescued me just a few hours later. Hearing her story, I silently thanked myself for a tiny detail that I had completely forgotten about. Around the time I bought the car, my girlfriend had just gotten a new phone. She was complaining about how annoying it was to transfer all her data. Since I work in IT, I helped her set up a few automatic backup features. While I was at it, I also linked my car's dashcam to her phone and turned on a new feature, automatically syncing alert videos whenever she was connected to Wi-Fi. It was just a random thing I did on a whim, and I pretty much forgot about it afterward. I was incredibly lucky because that exact feature ended up saving my life. After hugging and kissing my girlfriend to thank her, I still didn't forget to quietly ask about the safety of my other girlfriend. Fortunately, the Lexus was still parked in the lot, completely untouched, without a single scratch. The guy had only wanted to knock me out and dump me into his own vehicle to drive me away. The next day, the police called to update me on the investigation. After a broader look into the case, they found out that this guy belonged to a criminal ring that set up fake scenarios targeting car owners who park in isolated spots. Those midnight dashcam alerts weren't a technical glitch at all. It was their way of scouting and evaluating their targets before making a move. If they saw a car owner was too alert or called the cops, they would move on to someone else. I had blindly become their target after being watched by them for nights without having any clue. It was a brutal lesson, and to this day, I never allow myself to ignore any unusual signs again. My name is Alyssa. My husband always jokes that I'm a real-life superhero, but I didn't save anyone else's life that day. The only person I managed to save was myself. This story happened back in 1989. My husband and I had been married for just a year, and we had recently moved into a unit in an apartment complex located near the hospital where he worked. Since my husband was a surgeon who frequently worked overnight shifts, I spent most of my evenings at home completely alone. In the beginning, I tried to get to know my neighbors. Most of them were very friendly, except for one man who lived in the apartment right next door. He always wore a grumpy expression and almost never responded when I said hello. The other neighbors also mentioned he was a difficult person to get along with, so I stopped trying to make conversation with him. My husband and I hoped our lives in the new place would soon settle down so we could start planning for a baby. But just a few weeks after moving in, I fell into a state of intense discomfort and unease. I even thought the apartment was haunted because of a series of bizarre occurrences. First, our bedroom smelled faintly of cigarette smoke every single night, even though neither my husband nor I smoked. Next, my underwear was frequently messed with, and a few pieces even vanished without a trace. Worst of all, I always had a vague, creepy feeling, like a pair of eyes was staring down at me from above. I told my husband about it a few times, but he figured I just hadn't adjusted to the new environment yet. Every time he came home from a long shift at the hospital, he was completely exhausted, so I didn't want to cause him any extra worry. Because of that, I tried to ignore everything until the true horror happened 3 months later. Late one night, while my husband was away on another overnight shift, I was jolted awake by a noise coming from the walk-in closet. Thinking it was just a mouse, I got up to check. I walked inside and flipped on the light. The exact moment I looked up at the ceiling, my entire body froze in pure terror. The drywall panel covering the ceiling crawl space access had been pushed to the side. From that dark opening, a man was slowly lowering himself down. When his feet hit the floor, I was horrified to realize it was the neighbor from next door. We stood frozen, staring at each other for a few seconds. Suddenly, he snapped, his eyes rolling back in a crazed frenzy. He whipped a sharp knife out of his pocket and lunged straight at me. There was no chance to escape, and there was no time to call for help. In a split second, where life and death hung in the balance, I fought back in absolute desperation. He swung the knife, aiming a fatal stab straight into my chest. Instinctively, I threw my hands up to protect myself. A sharp, agonizing pain shot through my entire body as the blade pierced right through my palm of my hand like paper. Blood immediately sprayed everywhere. I used every ounce of strength I had left to scratch his face with my other hand and scream for help. God saved my life when, during a moment of struggle, he lost his footing and slammed hard into the wardrobe. Recognizing my only chance to survive, I immediately bolted out of the room and screamed for everyone to call the police. My husband rushed right back home the moment I called to tell him what happened. The police arrived quickly, and a manhunt took place that very night. They caught the sick neighbor right inside his own apartment. At that moment, he was in his bathroom trying to wash away the blood and tend to his wounds. As the criminal was handcuffed and led away, the police conducted a forensic sweep along the shared ceiling space between our two apartments. That was when a shocking truth was uncovered that left me completely devastated. The space above the drywall ceilings of my apartment and his was completely connected. The neighbor had taken advantage of this design flaw to crawl into my home for months. He had cut tiny peepholes along the ventilation pipes that looked directly down at my bed and my bathroom. In the crawl space right above my headboard, the police found a pillow, a flashlight, a few empty soda cans, and all of my missing underwear carefully stored away. That sick monster had been lying up there every single night, smoking cigarettes, which explained the smell, and spying on me for a very long time before he finally decided to jump down with a knife to murder me. He was arrested and received a fitting prison sentence under the law. My husband and I moved away immediately after, doing everything we could to ensure he stayed behind bars for as long as possible. But even though he is locked away, the trauma he caused me has never truly gone away. More than 30 years have passed since that horrific night. To this day, I still cannot get a good night's sleep if I have to stay home alone.
My name is Bradley. This story happened a while ago and became the most bizarre experience of my life so far. I had just graduated from college and landed my very first job. At first, I was still living in the apartment I rented during my student years. But since I didn't have my own car yet and had to take the bus, commuting to work every day took way too much time and left me completely exhausted. I decided to find a new place closer to my office. As a new employee, the expensive cost of living in Boston was a massive financial burden. But right around that time, a real estate agent hooked me up with an apartment rental at an incredibly cheap price. The apartment was on the 10th floor, which was the top floor of an old building. It was small, but it made commuting easy and was more than enough to make a recent graduate like me happy. From there, taking the bus to my office took only about 15 minutes. I liked it so much that I signed the lease almost immediately. After I moved into the new place, everything was pretty peaceful. Even though the building was outdated, the hallways were a bit dim, and the elevator made a heavy, groaning sound whenever it ran. I didn't care much because my commute was so much better. I had more time to sleep, and my mental state improved a lot. Until one night, things started to get weird. That day, I had to stay late at the office for overtime. By the time the bus dropped me off at the building, the entire apartment complex had fallen completely silent. There was only the faint glow of the hallway lights and the dry, harsh scraping sound of the old elevator echoing in the night. The building's elevator used a very old-school design, the kind you almost never see anymore. The elevator shaft was surrounded by an open metal mesh frame, and the door on each floor had a small glass window set right at eye level. As the elevator moved, the person inside could catch a quick glimpse of each floor's hallway as they passed by. Dragging my exhausted body along, I stepped into the elevator. While waiting to go up to the 10th floor, I just stared through that small glass window, watching each floor pass by. Suddenly, as the elevator passed the 9th floor, I locked eyes with a man standing right up against the outside of the door in the hallway. I jumped out of my skin. In that split second, I clearly saw that his face was completely covered in blood, and it even looked badly disfigured. Thinking a horrific accident had just happened, I immediately smashed the button for the 9th floor to go back down and check on him. However, when the elevator doors slid open, there was no bleeding man standing there. The hallway was completely empty. There wasn't even a single drop of blood on the floor. I stood there dazed for a moment, and then reasoned with myself that it was probably just very late, and working overtime had made me so tired that my eyes were playing tricks on me. With that thought, I went back up to my apartment. The next day, I had to work late again. When I got back home late, I stepped into the same elevator. This time, the elevator suddenly stopped on the 9th floor all by itself. At first, I thought someone had just accidentally pressed the button from the outside and walked away. But when the doors opened, the 9th floor hallway was completely vacant. Right then, for some reason, I remembered the man covered in blood I had seen the night before. A sudden shiver ran down my spine. I looked around one more time and tried to calm myself down, telling myself it was all just a coincidence. But from that night on, every single time I worked overtime and came home late, the elevator would stop on the 9th floor. This exact thing kept happening over and over, making me think that the elevator system was genuinely glitching out. Eventually, I went down to the building's management office to report the elevator issue. The manager seemed a bit surprised when I mentioned the 9th floor, but he didn't seem overly worried. He wrote down my complaint and said he would have a maintenance crew check the system as soon as possible. Still, I couldn't shake the gut feeling that something was wrong. That night, curiosity and anxiety wouldn't let me sit still. I decided to find out for myself if anything unusual had ever happened on the 9th floor of this building. I started searching for information about the building online. After digging through old local news articles and threads in a residents' forum, I uncovered an accident that had happened there about a year earlier. According to the article, an elevator technician had been sent to fix a malfunction on the 9th floor in the evening. While the mechanic was working near the open shaft, the elevator car, which was stopped on the 10th floor, suddenly suffered a catastrophic failure. He didn't have time to get out of the way and died instantly at the scene. The article didn't show a picture of the victim, but just knowing the accident happened right on the 9th floor gave me goosebumps. I immediately pictured the man I had seen through the small window on the elevator door that night. The face covered in blood, the eyes staring directly into mine for that brief second. Before this, I had kept trying to convince myself that it was just a hallucination brought on by exhaustion from working consecutive days of overtime. But after reading that article, I wasn't sure anymore. The very next day, management hired a technical team to inspect the entire elevator system. They performed maintenance for nearly a whole day before putting the elevator back into service. Ever since that tune-up, the elevator never stopped on the 9th floor on its own again. Everything seemed to return to normal. Even so, I still couldn't forget what I had seen. If that phenomenon was purely a technical glitch, why did it always happen on the exact floor where the mechanic lost his life? And if it really was just a coincidence, then who was the man covered in blood I saw through the glass that night? I stayed in that apartment for 1 more year. Once my job and income became more stable, I finally moved somewhere else. During the rest of my time in that building, whenever I stepped into the elevator, I absolutely refused to look through that small glass window on the door ever again.
This story happened when I was in elementary school. At the time, I had a best friend named Tabby, who was always cracking jokes and pulling pranks. I knew Tabby was very brave and had a special obsession with ghosts and spirits, but I never thought that one day things would go way too far. One day during class, Tabby suddenly turned to me and whispered that he could actually see ghosts. I immediately figured it was just another one of his pranks, so I didn't pay much attention to it. Then, one afternoon, Tabby invited me over to his house to hang out. After school ended, I walked home with him. Tabby's house was located in the suburbs, in a very quiet neighborhood with barely anyone walking around. The moment I stepped through the front door, I felt a wave of discomfort. Even though it was broad daylight outside, every single window in the house was shut tight. Heavy, thick curtains were drawn completely closed, blocking out all the sunlight and leaving the inside pitch black and freezing cold. I asked him out of curiosity why the house was like this. Tabby casually explained, "Because the ghost in this house loves the dark. It can't stand the light." Hearing that made me a little annoyed. I reminded Tabby that he knew exactly how much I hated scary things, and I demanded that he stop joking around. However, Tabby's face didn't look like he was joking at all. He looked straight at me and confirmed in a completely serious voice that he wasn't lying. To prove it, Tabby took off the necklace he was wearing, hung it over the living room doorknob, and gave it a gentle tap with his finger. And then, something very bizarre happened. Normally, a necklace would just swing back and forth a few times and then stop. But this time, it kept swinging continuously, showing absolutely no signs of slowing down. Tabby stared intensely at the swinging necklace and whispered, "See? It's playing with the necklace right now." Right at that exact moment, that creepy phenomenon unfolded before my eyes. A sudden numb sensation appeared and spread all the way down my left arm. The eerie timing between the swinging necklace and the bizarre feeling in my body caused total panic to explode inside me. Unable to handle that suffocatingly weird atmosphere for another second, I screamed, bolted out the door, and ran as fast as I could all the way home. Once I was back in the comfort of my own bedroom, I slowly calmed down. I started to feel guilty for leaving so abruptly, so I decided to call Tabby to apologize. But as soon as he answered, Tabby broke down in tears, sobbing that he was the one who should apologize for scaring me. After a long hesitation, Tabby told me that while I was at his house, the ghost had tightly latched itself onto my left arm. I gasped in pure terror when I heard that. From the moment I left Tabby's house up until that very second, my left arm had been constantly tingling and numb for no apparent reason. From that moment on, my arm grew more and more uncomfortable by the hour. But I didn't dare tell my parents because I was afraid they would scold me and tell me I was being ridiculous. Worse, they might drag me to the doctor to get a shot. That night, I tossed and turned for hours because my left arm kept aching. Finally, around 2 a.m, after tossing and turning in agony, I drifted off to sleep without even realizing it. But that wasn't the end of it. When I opened my eyes the next morning, I discovered I was lying in a hospital bed. The first thing I felt was a dull ache all over my body, especially in both of my arms. My right arm was hooked up to an IV drip, while my left arm was covered in dark bruises, looking as if it had been slammed hard against something. My mom was sitting right next to me. Her face was full of worry, and her eyes were red and swollen from crying. She kept asking me how I felt. I asked her what had happened, and she recounted the events of the previous night. Around 4 a.m, while she was asleep, she heard strange noises coming from the living room. She walked out and found me walking around the house with a blank, soulless expression on my face. She called out my name, but a second later, I suddenly collapsed onto the floor, completely terrifying her. No matter how much she shook me, I wouldn't wake up. So my parents immediately rushed me to the emergency room. Later that afternoon, I was discharged from the hospital. The doctors had run a whole battery of tests, but couldn't find a single thing wrong with me. They suggested that I might have experienced a severe episode of psychological stress or a sleepwalking fit, causing me to wander around unconsciously and bump into the furniture. As soon as I got home, I immediately called Tabby and told him about everything I experienced that night. After listening to my story, Tabby burst into heavy tears over the phone, repeatedly apologizing to me. He promised he would never let anything like that happen again. And true to his word, from that day forward, Tabby absolutely never uttered the word ghost or brought up anything supernatural in front of me again. By our final year of middle school, Tabby's family moved to another state, and we gradually lost touch over time. But even now, whenever I look back on that memory, I still can't fully make sense of it. Because I was so young back then, I don't know if Tabby just used some clever trick to fool me, or if he genuinely had the ability to see ghosts. Either way, it remains an incredibly strange and chilling experience in my life. My name is Stella. This happened when I was 25, right around the time the COVID-19 pandemic first hit. Money was tight back then because of the tough economy, so I started buying wholesale liquidation pallets to flip for a profit. Each pallet was completely random, so you never really knew what was inside. On one occasion, I bought a pallet that mostly contained swimsuits, underwear, and socks for women and young girls. I listed the items individually, but I also posted an option to sell the entire lot to anyone who wanted it. Just a few minutes after posting the listing, I received a message from a middle-aged woman. Her profile picture showed a pleasant-looking lady in her late 50s or early 60s. She told me she wanted to buy the whole batch as a gift for her daughter and granddaughters who lived out of town. The conversation felt completely normal, and we agreed to meet the next day at a public parking lot to do the swap. On the day of the meetup, right as I was getting ready to leave, I suddenly received a message from a completely different account asking to push the time back by 30 minutes. This person explained that her old account had suddenly been locked, so she had to use a backup profile to contact me. Even though I felt a little uneasy about it, I brushed it off because I really wanted to make the sale. However, the deal started getting sketchier by the minute. The person kept changing the meeting spot. I refused and insisted that we stick to the original public location. Finally, the person offered to pay me an extra $100 if I would just deliver the items directly to their house. At that point, all I could focus on was the extra cash, so I agreed. The person set the time for around 5:30 p.m. and texted me the address. When I looked up the location on GPS, I hesitated for a moment. The destination was deep in a heavily wooded area, far away from any major residential neighborhoods. A wave of anxiety washed over me, but I told myself that people must still live out there, so I didn't think much more of it. By late afternoon, I was driving down the route provided by the map. The deeper I went, the more desolate the surroundings became. Since it was winter, the sun was setting very early. The moment I arrived at the address, my sense of dread spiked completely. The area was almost entirely isolated. There were only a few old, run-down houses, scattered far apart from one another. My cell phone service dropped to a weak, flickering signal, and the road leading in was completely dead and empty. In the fading twilight, the whole place looked like it had been abandoned ages ago. Standing out there in the middle of nowhere, I finally realized I had made a massive mistake. I had come to this place completely alone, and I hadn't told a single soul where I was going. Fear kept me pinned to my seat. I stayed inside the car, cracked the window just a tiny bit, and called out loudly to see if anyone was coming to get the packages. After a moment, the front door of the house creaked open. Someone was standing right behind the door, but they wouldn't step outside. Their entire body was swallowed by the darkness of the house. Only a voice echoed out, asking if I could carry the heavy boxes inside for them. My survival instincts were screaming at me that if I crossed that threshold, I might never come back out. I immediately said no. The person inside stood perfectly still for a few seconds. Seeing my stubborn refusal, the person finally decided to step outside. And that was when I laid eyes on one of the most terrifying people I have ever met. I know it's wrong to judge someone based entirely on their looks, but this man genuinely made my skin crawl. He stood nearly 7 feet tall and was unnaturally incredibly gaunt. His face was completely hollowed out, and his hair was chopped in a jagged, messy way. Some sections were long and stringy, while other parts looked almost completely bald. His entire look and vibe instantly reminded me of a serial killer straight out of a horror movie. He slowly started walking toward my car. As I watched him approach, it suddenly hit me what I was actually selling: underwear, swimsuits, and socks meant for women and little girls. The panic hit me even harder. I couldn't think of a single normal reason why a man like him would want to buy those specific items. Horrifying thoughts started racing through my mind about the sick fetishes he might be hiding, or worse, even darker possibilities. When he reached the car, he asked me one more time to help him carry the boxes inside the house. There was absolutely no way I was going to do that. I quickly lied and told him that I had to get to my night shift right away and that my boyfriend was already waiting for me at my workplace. I added that if I was even a few minutes late, he would definitely start calling around to find me. I saw the muscles in the man's face twitch violently. He turned his head to look back down the empty dirt trail leading out of the woods, as if he were weighing his options. A few seconds later, a look of pure irritation washed over his face. Without saying another word, he yanked the heavy boxes out of my trunk himself, tossed a wad of cash through my cracked window, turned around, and walked straight back into the house. I slammed the window shut, hit the gas, and tore out of that place as fast as my car could go. It wasn't until I cleared the wooded area and my phone finally got a signal back that I felt like I could breathe normally again. On my way home, I pulled over and chatted with a local resident from that area to ask about the man. The resident told me that he was a notorious eccentric in the community. Everyone knew he had severe mental issues and exhibited highly erratic behavior. Even though he had never been convicted of a serious crime, most of the locals stayed far away from him because he felt incredibly dangerous. To this day, every time I look back on that night, I still believe I was a hair's breadth away from a situation turning horribly wrong. I still can't help but wonder if that man really bought those clothes for himself, or if he had a much more terrifying purpose in mind.
Hello, how may I help you? Please help me. I just shot a man. Could you please explain the situation further? My wife was just attacked by him. Please come here and help me. Do you need ambulance, fire truck, or police car? Yes, I need everything. That was the phone call received at 10 p.m. at our police station. I'm William, 47 years old, working as a police officer in Ohio. That evening I was on duty with 2 colleagues. We received a report of a serious assault at a residence about 15 kilometers from the station. Immediately, myself and another colleague moved to that house. Upon arrival, the scene inside the house left us stunned. Under the floor, a man and a woman lay apart from each other. The woman had been attacked, her head severely disfigured. The man had 3 gunshot wounds to his forehead, blood still flowing. Bloodstains covered the floor and walls, yet to dry. The room was in disarray. A man around 40 years old sat on the sofa, holding a trembling and crying little girl about 6 years old. He wore a blood-stained sweatshirt, and his right arm was deeply torn. That was Henry, the husband of the attacked woman, and the one who had called the police. The medical staff began assessing the condition of Henry's wife and the other man. I asked Henry questions to gather information while my colleague observed the scene. Henry was visibly panicked when he saw us arrive. He kept asking if his wife was okay and begged the medical staff to save her. We tried to reassure Henry, promising to do our best, but looking at the grim reality, we knew both his wife and the other man were already dead. After Henry calmed down, he painfully recounted the whole story. Henry's family had a small gym in the basement. That Sunday afternoon, Henry was working out on the treadmill down in the basement. Suddenly, there was a loud noise on the roof. Henry rushed upstairs and called out his wife Martha's name, but she didn't respond. Entering the bedroom, Henry didn't find his wife anywhere, only his 6-year-old daughter lying on the bed. As Henry stepped into the living room, he was suddenly attacked by a man wielding a dirty axe. Reacting quickly, Henry managed to dodge, and the axe swung down hard onto his right arm. After assessing the situation, Henry hastily retrieved the gun hidden in the drawer and fired 3 shots into the man's forehead in self-defense. Then he saw his wife lying on the floor with a horrified expression. Henry immediately called the police. Henry told us that the man who attacked his wife was named Isaac. I was surprised and asked how he knew the name of the man. Henry said that Isaac had harassed Martha several times before. The man named Isaac, 35 years old, lived in a mobile home and had no relatives other than his girlfriend who lived with him. As Martha's body was being taken away, I noticed that the couple's daughter kept screaming and looking at Henry with hatred in her eyes. The girl seemed like she wanted to run towards us and say something, but was restrained by Henry. He tightly held onto her arm, glaring at her fiercely. But I soon forgot about this detail as I focused on the case. The investigation into Isaac's background revealed prior allegations of domestic violence against women. Everything seemed clear-cut, yet the perpetrator was already deceased and the case was swiftly resolved. Henry was also acquitted of the murder charge on grounds of self-defense. However, Henry didn't stop there. He kept demanding justice, insisting that Isaac pay for taking Martha's life. Henry was seemingly deeply distraught over his wife's death, leading to some unusual actions. It was a swift but haunting case for me. Until 6 months after the case was closed, the police department received a phone call from a mysterious woman claiming to be a friend of Martha. She said she wanted to report the real murderer in Martha's case from 6 months prior. Immediately, arrangements were made for her to come to the police station and provide her statement. The girl was Keva. Keva asserted that the person who killed Martha was Henry, Martha's husband. Keva confessed that she and Henry had an affair while Martha was still alive. Henry planned to kill his wife and take possession of Martha's considerable wealth. He secretly investigated and discovered that Martha was having an affair. The daughter he cherished so much was actually the daughter of his wife and her lover. Henry shared his plan with Keva, hoping she would cooperate with him, but Keva adamantly refused. After being rejected by Keva, Henry shifted his focus to the man, Isaac, to manipulate him and frame him for the crime. Henry's plan unfolded perfectly according to what he had calculated. After Martha's death, he sold the house and bought a new one, living comfortably with the money he inherited from his wife. Keva revealed that she had wronged Martha by being involved with Henry. However, her conscience would never allow her to commit murder. Keva underwent psychological treatment for many months to be able to speak the truth. She urged us to quickly apprehend Henry because he might harm Martha's daughter. We arrived at the address provided by Keva and witnessed Martha's daughter being abused by a strange woman. The girl, with a face resembling her late mother's, cried loudly and begged for forgiveness from the unknown woman. Shortly after, Henry returned home and appeared shocked to see us. The cold-blooded man was living off the money of his deceased wife, along with his lover, who was 20 years younger than him. The case was reinvestigated, and Henry was sentenced to death for the first-degree murder. His accomplice received a 7-year prison sentence for child abuse. After everything, the one who suffered the most severe damage was still Martha's daughter. I'm Jason, and these are my 2 hands without fingers. This is the most painful and terrifying experience I've ever had. 10 years ago, I was a sophomore at the University of California, San Diego. I spent my free time working as a freelance deliverer. The job was risky, but it offered flexible hours and helped me cover my living expenses. Occasionally, I'd receive extra tips, which always made me excited. I'd been doing this job for nearly a year when that fateful night occurred. On that day, I didn't go to work. Instead, I spent time working on a presentation for the end of a course. I forgot to update my account on the order receiving website to not accepting orders. Around 10 p.m., my account received a notification about a delivery order. Before I could read all the details, my phone rang unexpectedly from an unknown number. I answered, and on the other end was a woman who wanted me to deliver the package to the specified address by midnight. She emphasized that it was 12 midnight and instructed me to be punctual. Before I could respond, the call ended abruptly. Right after that, the delivery fee was transferred to my account. Seeing the amount, I couldn't believe my eyes. It was 10 times more than my usual orders. Immediately, I forgot about the importance of my presentation. I rushed from my dorm to the location where the orders were gathered. On the package, there was an address and a phone number, but no recipient name. I started the delivery at 10:30 p.m. It was an old but spacious house tucked away in a narrow alley. Checking my watch, it was 11:57, and I stood at the door, ready and alert, not daring to waste a single second. As the clock struck midnight, I immediately rang the doorbell. But before the bell stopped ringing, the door of the house swung open. From inside, an elderly woman stepped out, looking at me with indifferent eyes. She was tall, but her skin was wrinkled and dark, with high cheekbones and sunken features, and her hair was disheveled, some parts long, some short. I politely greeted her and handed her the package. When I presented the delivery slip and asked her to sign to confirm the receipt of the package,
She hesitated. Instead of signing, she stared at my hand for a moment before speaking in a deep, hoarse voice that startled me slightly. "Would you stay for dinner with me?" "I'm terribly sorry, ma'am, but Without letting me finish, she handed me $100, saying it was a tip. She promised to pay more if I agreed to have dinner with her and assured me it would only take 20 minutes. I agreed, feeling a bit crazy, but that's what I did at the time. I thought she might be very lonely and in need of companionship. Plus, it wouldn't take much time, and I could go home and continue preparing for tomorrow's presentation. Stepping into the house, everything was rather old but clean and orderly. She invited me to sit at the dining table, where food and utensils were already prepared for two. She went into the kitchen to get something. Wanting to break the silence, I asked her name. "Adela," came the short, indifferent reply. I tried asking a few more questions, but she didn't respond, so I fell silent. A moment later, she emerged, placing a pair of scissors and a gun on the table. I was both surprised and puzzled why dinner would require a gun. Adela placed the package on the table and used the scissors to open it. As soon as the last strip of tape was cut and the box was opened, I felt a horrifying regret for agreeing to dinner with her. The package I had delivered turned out to contain human fingers. Adela poured the blood-stained fingers onto her plate and mine. A chill ran down my spine. My skin crawled and my mind reeled in shock. I was too stunned to speak. Adela gripped the gun tightly and began devouring the fingers voraciously. She looked at me and ordered me to eat. Trembling, I lifted the fork and stabbed at a piece of salad near the fingers. I forced a bite of salad into my mouth, suppressing my urge to retch. The metallic stench of blood overwhelmed me, causing my head to spin. I gagged and clamped my mouth shut, sitting in silence as I watched the terrifying woman devour the fingers on the plate. My body was drenched in sweat, shivering uncontrollably, every cell in me trembling. Adela took a tissue to wipe the blood from her mouth just as the table clock unexpectedly chimed loudly. "The 20-minute dinner is over," Adela's terrifying voice echoed. She pulled out $100 and placed it on the table. Adela then initiated another transaction. She said she would pay me $100,000 if I'd let her eat all 10 of my fingers. "These fingers taste too ordinary. Your fingers look tastier," she said. My heart felt like it was being squeezed. This woman was truly insane. I began to feel uneasy, fully aware of everything around me, but I couldn't control my body anymore. I sat there witnessing the whole process of that insane woman eating my fingers, one by one, without resistance, pain, or screams. I woke up in the hospital with both hands bandaged. I still couldn't control my body. The doctor informed me that all 10 fingertips had been severed. Blood tests revealed I was poisoned with a toxin that rendered my body in a paralyzed state beyond control. A passerby found me in a dire condition by the roadside and brought me to the hospital. As for Adela, she was found dead in that house, choked on bone fragments lodged in her throat. She was infected with a virus that affected her brain and nervous system due to cannibalism. I abandoned my studies and lost a bright future ahead of me. If only I hadn't been consumed by greed and curiosity. I wish I could forget the horrifying images of that night forever.
I'm Erica, 18 years old, living in Ohio with my parents and a younger brother. I am really glued to my phone. I can spend hours, even whole days, browsing the web. 2 or 3 a.m. is usually when I go to bed every day, and the posture will always be me holding the phone and dozing off. I feel like there's too little time to use my phone during the day. Whenever possible, the only thing I do is sit or lie down and hold my phone. I rarely share my thoughts and difficulties with my parents. Sharing it via text with friends or strangers on social media is easier for me. One day, After having dinner with my parents, I went to my room to do some things and grabbed my phone. I had no one to talk to. I updated the status on my Instagram account. I'm really bored and want someone to talk to. At exactly 3 a.m., when I was about to go to sleep, I received a message from an unknown Instagram account. "You're not sleeping, huh?" I was quite surprised, staring at the message for a few seconds. But thinking about the status I had updated, I thought someone else might be lonely, like me. The typing indicator appeared. A few seconds later, another message made me shiver. "Do you know, demons appear at 3 a.m., accompanied by a red demon face?" I felt uncomfortable and immediately blocked that account, wondering who the crazy person was. I continued browsing the web. About 5 minutes later, a message was sent from another strange account. "I will devour you if you dare to do that again." My heart started beating faster. "Don't be scared. I'm just kidding. I'll always be by your side. I'm seeing you very clearly. I can smell your perfume. I really like it." I jumped up reading those creepy messages. Observing around the room, I looked closely at every object, every nook and cranny. I felt scared of the very familiar things I use daily. The sound of a message being sent startled me. "Are you curious to know who I am?" Immediately after, a grotesque picture was sent, and I was so frightened that I dropped the phone on the bed. It took a few seconds to calm down. I went online to search for information about the picture. The Wendigo, a malevolent spirit in Algonquin culture. It's often described as a tall, skinny creature with long, sharp claws. The Wendigo is said to have the ability to transform into a human and eat people. I read every word, and goosebumps covered my body. "Something super surprising is going to happen to you. Wait and see." My heart felt like it was being squeezed, beating twice as fast. I looked around. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it wasn't good at all. The sound of a message echoed. I hastily picked up the phone. It was a picture in which Thomas, my boyfriend, was dead hanging. I screamed as loudly as I could, trying to release all the fear within me. Surprised, aren't you? I quickly jumped out of bed and rushed towards the door of the room, desperate to call out loudly for my parents' help. Just as my hand reached for the doorknob, the sound of a message echoed again. "I'm behind the door waiting for you. Open the door. Let me taste your blood." My legs went weak, and I collapsed to the floor. I tried to breathe steadily to calm myself down. I dialed my mom's phone, but I couldn't connect. I called my dad, my younger brother, my best friend, but all in vain. I was so scared that I felt like crying. I was trapped in my own room with a flesh-eating demon. The unbelievable and absurd was happening to me. "Don't cry. I'm right next to you." The sound of the message echoed again, and I trembled as I held the phone. Another photo was sent. It was my parents' bedroom, with them lying on the bed asleep. But the figure holding the camera that captured them was eerie, tall, and gaunt. Next was a photo of my little brother sleeping. The photographer was so close, yet faceless. In the corner of the image, sharp claws were visible. I felt like I was going mad. I was being tormented and controlled by that demon. Panic, fear, helplessness, everything compressed in my chest as if it were about to explode. The next photo was sent. In it was me, precisely at this moment. I was screaming in agony and despair. Looking around the room, I wanted to find that demon. I shouted angrily and challenged. I wouldn't let that demon control me anymore. A horrifying laughter echoed, and the room was still empty, except for me. I searched the room, destroying everything within reach, peering into the smallest corners. Finally, I looked under the bed. There it was, holding the phone with a sinister smile on the face identical to mine, mouth full of sharp teeth. "I am right next to you." We are one and together. We are residing within one another.
I'm Erica, 26 years old, living alone in Mississippi. I don't have many relatives. I've been living with my grandparents in Florida since I was young. I don't know who my father is. As for my mother, according to my grandparents, she was swept away and disappeared in a flood when I was 4 years old. After graduating from college, I moved to Mississippi to live and work. Mississippi is one of the states in the Gulf Coast region, heavily affected by hurricanes, floods, and tornadoes. Every year, the government evacuates us to safer areas during disasters. The people here are accustomed to and quite experienced with this. Nevertheless, like everyone else living here, I love the land of Mississippi. 5 years ago, also during a relocation due to a natural disaster, the horrifying story happened, and now looking back, I still feel chills running down my spine. In February 2019, a serious flood occurred in the southern and central regions of Mississippi. There was a significant amount of rainfall, causing millions of dollars in damage and displacing over 15,000 people. My neighbors and I were among them. We were moved to an elementary school where there should be enough sleeping space for the overwhelming number of people. Upon arriving at the temporary shelter area, I called my grandparents to reassure them. We were informed that we would be here for about a week to ensure the flood would subside completely. We were no strangers to relocations like this anymore. People adapted quite quickly and easily. Each person would be provided with personal items, necessary food, and a sleeping bag. The sleeping bag was the horrifying nightmare for me after that relocation. Until now, I'm afraid of all the big zipper locking bags. After dinner and personal hygiene, we went to the classrooms to rest. I remember each classroom could accommodate a maximum of 20 people. I found a suitable spot for myself and lay down. I usually read before going to sleep. Luckily, I managed to bring the book I was reading before the relocation. Lying down reading for a while, I noticed a strange woman in the room. She was quite small, with disheveled clothes and a panicked look on her face. She kept pacing around the room, mumbling incessantly, clutching the sleeping bag tightly. I didn't pay much attention to her, continuing to read my book. After a while, when everyone had fallen asleep, I looked at my phone. It was almost midnight. I also marked my page and prepared to go to sleep. Just as I closed my eyes, I heard murmurs from someone. Despite trying to ignore it, it was very clear and close to me. I pulled the sleeping bag down and turned around. My heart seemed to stop for a few seconds. Right in front of me was the face of that woman. She had wide open eyes, staring at me and sporting a sinister smile. Her breath smelled terribly, like a corpse. Reflexively, I sat up, yelled loudly while moving back. Some people who hadn't fallen asleep heard my loud scream and immediately got up to check the situation. The room lights were turned on, and the neighbor asked me what had happened. Terrified, I pointed towards the woman, saying she was very creepy and smelled awful. But looking back, lying asleep in the sleeping bag, was an old lady. I stared at her in amazement. While everyone threw me their annoying glances, everyone returned to their place, turned off the lights and went to sleep. I moved to another corner of the room, pulled the sleeping bag high, leaving only a small hole for air to enter. My heart still hadn't returned to normal beats. After a while, still unable to sleep, I gently pulled the sleeping bag down and looked outside. The woman was lying there, looking at me, but her head was completely turned upside down compared to her body. I tightly shut my mouth, trying not to make any loud noises. I pulled the zipper of the sleeping bag to cover my body completely, trying to regulate my breathing. I closed my eyes, put on my headphones, and fell asleep without knowing when. The next morning when I woke up, the first thing I did was look around the room. The woman had disappeared. About 4 days later,
Everything went on as usual. I never met that woman again. People in the shelter didn't care or remember anything about her. We were all happy when the government announced that the flood had completely receded. After today, we can safely return home and resume our normal lives. That night, I don't remember how long I slept. A foul smell hit my nose, causing me to wake up in a daze. That terrible smell made me wake up immediately. I sat up, looked around. Everyone was still sleeping. Turning to the left, I saw someone lying next to me, the sleeping bag covering the entire body. My neighbor Maria was lying on the right. I shook her awake. I asked her if she smelled anything unpleasant. Maria sniffed, looked around, then said she didn't smell anything and went back to sleep. But the smell of decay was very clear. Why didn't anyone else smell it? The next morning I woke up. That foul smell was still there. It made me extremely dizzy and nauseous. Everyone was quickly packing up to go home. The person in the sleeping bag next to me still hadn't woken up. I was surprised, reached out to wake that person up. As soon as I touched the sleeping bag, a loud noise rang out, making me startled. I called out loudly a few more times, but the person inside the sleeping bag still didn't respond. I trembled, reached out to pull the zipper of the bag down. Inside the sleeping bag was a rotting corpse. I immediately screamed loudly and jumped out of control. People around came to help me calm down. I was crying and trembling, trying to tell them about the terrifying thing inside that sleeping bag. Once again, the incomprehensible looks were staring at me. A man came over, picked up the sleeping bag. A few snacks and a bottle fell out from inside. He looked at me uncomfortably, saying it was his sleeping bag and I should stop making such a fuss. I was panicked. Finally, what was going on? Why was I the only one seeing those terrifying things? On the way home, I heard the radio on the bus recounting the case of a woman. Her name was Louisa. 22 years ago, when she was 27 years old, she was a single mother who was swept away by the flood while going to pick up her 4-year-old daughter from school. Louisa's body was never found. I was stunned. My whole body was freezing cold. I remembered the horrific image of that woman. She had eyes very similar to my mother's.
I am Joseph, 27 years old, currently working in real estate. My girlfriend Sarah and I have been together for 8 years. She is 2 years younger than me. Although we haven't made plans to get married, we've been living together for 2 years now. We reside in a comfortable house I bought in Austin, Texas. Sarah is amazing. She's beautiful and understanding. We share everything and do everything together. I often take her to gatherings with friends and business partners. People often tell me how lucky I am to have Sarah. I have a close friend named Charles, and Sarah has a close friend named Selena. Charles has been hitting on Selena, and he asked Sarah and me for help in winning her over. It would be great if they became a couple. We've been happy together until one day. That day, I had an important meeting with clients, so I told Sarah I would be home late. Around 6 p.m., Sarah texted me that she had already arrived home. Feeling reassured, I continued my work, planning to surprise Sarah with a bouquet of sunflowers when I got home. Sunflowers are her favorite flowers. But things didn't go as planned. I ended up coming home 3 hours later than expected. I hurriedly called Sarah right after finishing my work, but she didn't answer. When I arrived home, it was nearly midnight and the lights were still on. I thought Sarah was waiting for me. Entering the house with the bouquet and a cheerful smile, I called out to her, but there was no response. I hung up my coat and put down my laptop, holding the bouquet, and rushed to the kitchen. She wasn't there, although the dining table was set and the food had gone cold. I found it odd. Perhaps Sarah was upset that I was late. I ran upstairs to the bedroom, but it was dark inside. I turned on the light, but Sarah wasn't there. She wasn't in the bathroom or the study either. I started to feel worried. Sarah never gets upset for no reason, and she wouldn't leave me without saying anything to me. Searching throughout the house again, I urgently called Sarah's phone. The ringing echoed somewhere. I chuckled, thinking Sarah was just playing a prank on me. Following the sound of the ringing phone, I once again felt disappointed and more worried. Sarah's phone was lying in the kitchen sink. I unlocked her phone, and the screen displayed our ongoing conversation. Her message asking me when I would be home hadn't been sent. I began to panic. Sarah had never behaved like this before. I called Sarah's parents and her best friend Selena. They all said Sarah hadn't been to their places and hadn't been in touch. I searched the house again, praying that this was just one of Sarah's jokes. I felt utterly helpless and panicked. I called the police to report Sarah missing. They told me to calm down. She might have gone somewhere and forgotten to take her phone. They asked me to wait until the next morning. I was extremely anxious and I couldn't sleep that night, pacing back and forth in the living room, hoping to see Sarah's silhouette. Sarah didn't return, and the police began their investigation. The last surveillance camera footage showed her walking home, carrying a bag. She hadn't left the house since then. There were no signs of forced entry into the house. Nothing valuable was taken. Could Sarah have disappeared? With no leads, the police investigation began to stall. I felt like I was going crazy, not being able to find Sarah or understand why she disappeared. A week later, I received the devastating news that Charles, my best friend, was also missing. Coincidentally, Sarah and Charles went missing on this same day. I was plunged into despair. My intuition about this wasn't good at all. Nearly a month after Sarah and Charles went missing, my health and work deteriorated significantly. Several times I met Selena, but she didn't seem concerned about Sarah and Charles. Selena had a new boyfriend. Stupid. That girl and Charles disappeared at the same time, and you didn't notice anything unusual? I regret trusting these two. They're probably having a good time somewhere. Selena's words shocked me. My intuition always being vigilant, I searched the house again. Standing in front of the door leading to the basement, my heart raced and I struggled to breathe. I pushed open the door and stepped inside. A strong smell of death hit my nostrils. In the corner of the basement was Sarah, wearing the dress I had given her. But she didn't look like my beautiful Sarah anymore. Next to her on the floor lay Charles. I recognized his familiar figure. He lay there, arms reaching towards the door. Panic and agony overwhelmed me. I couldn't remember how long I stood there trying to compose myself and call the police. After the autopsies, the police revealed Sarah's cause of death was suffocation due to strangulation, along with signs of assault. Charles was determined to have died after Sarah, with multiple stab wounds to his abdomen and chest. At the crime scene next to Sarah and Charles' bodies, the police found a kitchen knife. There were Sarah's fingerprints on the handle and Charles's on the blade. That knife was one of the set in my kitchen. What horrifying event had occurred to them? Now I understood why Charles always tried to meet Sarah. Was there really a relationship between Sarah and Charles that I didn't know about? Selena's words contained some secret. Losing Sarah was truly painful and horrifying to me.
I'm Dylan, 38 years old. I work as a financial analyst for a bank in San Jose. I don't have a girlfriend, nor do I have plans for married life. I'm quite introverted and a workaholic. Instead of finding myself a girlfriend and having sweet dates, I often work late at the company, sometimes even until night. One Wednesday evening, I remember leaving the office at 11 p.m. That day I didn't drive to work. I stood in front of the company to catch a taxi. It's strange because this area usually has many taxis, but today I've been waiting for 20 minutes and still haven't seen any passing by.
After a stressful day at work, I'm tired and starting to lose patience. It's almost 11:30 p.m., and a taxi suddenly arrives. I can't wait any longer and jump onto the road to flag down the vehicle. The taxi driver looks at me with panic, probably because of my somewhat crazy actions. The driver looks at me and then looks over to the passenger seat, appearing very panicked and worried. I glance over to the passenger seat, and it turns out this taxi already has a passenger. It's a girl. She's leaning her head against the window, seeming either drunk or quite tired. The taxi driver lowers the window, wearing a black face mask. He looks at me with concern. "Sorry, sir, I already have a passenger," he says. I'm too tired to wait for another taxi. I suggest that the driver lets me ride along, and he can drop off the girl first to maintain the order of the taxi call. He looks worriedly at the girl for a long time before turning to me. When I offer to pay double the fare, he reluctantly agrees. Getting into the car, I smell a strong smell of alcohol, so the girl must be drunk. The driver asks for my home address. He says that my house is closer than the girl's, so he'll drop me off first. I thank him. Out of appreciation, I engage in conversation and ask for her name, but he doesn't answer. I assume he's tired, so I keep quiet. I'm a bit curious, so I observe the girl. She looks quite young, probably in her early 20s. Her skin is pale, and her long hair covers most of her face. Despite the hot weather, she's wearing a high-neck sweater. The car suddenly brakes hard, and everything lurches forward. The driver says there was a cat crossing the road. I hear the girl's head bump against the car quite hard, but she doesn't react, still deeply asleep. I want to help her sit up straight, but the driver immediately refuses. He uses one hand to awkwardly adjust her sitting position. After a while, I suddenly smell a strong odor. I'm not sure, the smell of alcohol is still very strong. I look out realizing we're almost home, so I proactively pay the taxi fare. When I say I want to pay through the ride-hailing app, the driver immediately refuses, saying I should pay in cash. I don't have enough cash, so I hope he'll pass by the nearest ATM. The driver suddenly shows annoyance, urging me to hurry up. I withdraw money as quickly as possible. When I return to the car, I accidentally catch a glimpse of the girl's pale face sitting in the passenger seat. I freeze for a few seconds, wanting to observe her more closely. Surprisingly, I catch the cold gaze of the driver. I quickly get into the car and pay the taxi fare. The amount I give him is quite large, and I request change, but he refuses, saying he doesn't have any cash here. The more the driver gives me a sense of unease. Finally, I arrive home. It's almost 1 a.m. As I get out of the car before I can close the door, the taxi speeds away. Entering the house, images of that girl and the driver keep appearing in my mind. After showering, I go upstairs and fall asleep immediately. The next day is a day off, and I wake up quite late. I watch the news on TV, and they report a carjacking incident involving a taxi company. The driver of that taxi was repeatedly beaten on the head and died early this morning at the hospital. Along with that serious carjacking is the disappearance of a young girl named Alida. Putting everything together, I suddenly remember the taxi driver and the girl from last night. I will call the police to report everything I witnessed, but my phone has disappeared. I sit for a moment, trying to remember where I left it. On the taxi, I probably dropped it when I got out of the car. I called the police on the landline, recounting everything I witnessed. Using the GPS on my phone, the police quickly locate the stolen taxi. It's on an empty lot 40 kilometers away from the city. The car is running out of gas and both doors are wide open. Inside the car, on the passenger seat, the police discover blood soaked into the seat cushion and dried. About a week later, the police find the body of the missing girl under a tree, 10 kilometers from the location of the taxi. The girl's body has a long slash across her neck, which is the direct cause of her death. Through investigation, the police conclude that the girl found under the tree is the same girl in the taxi that I met that night. The driver's name was actually her terrible boyfriend impersonating. His name is Gary. After getting drunk, Gary brutally murdered his own girlfriend and tried to destroy the body. All evidence pointed to Gary being guilty, but the next challenge for the police was to find him. There were no clues left behind, and that murderer seemed to have vanished from this world. I am still shivered thinking about that night. I sat with the body of a girl with a brutal murderer for 30 minutes in the car. I'm Victor, 25 years old, living in Utah. I have a very close friend named Rose. We have known each other since college. After graduation, I settled and worked in Utah to be close to family, while Rose moved to Washington for work. Even though we were quite far apart, every year Rose and I would try to arrange our schedules to meet up or travel together. That year, we planned a 5-day vacation at Huntington Beach, California. Rose and I had sorted out our work schedules. Because we were far apart, we both took the initiative to travel from our respective locations and meet in California. On the first day of the vacation, I was luckier than Rose as my flight went smoothly. However, Rose's flight encountered some issues, and she called me to say she would be about 3 hours late. I was somewhat disappointed that things didn't go according to plan right on the first day. But there was nothing to be done about it, so I went to Starbucks at the airport to buy some coffee and pastries. After sitting in Starbucks for a while, I started to feel a bit suffocated. I decided to return to the airport lounge to wait for Rose since she would have an easier time finding me there. A while later, while looking at my phone, a man nearby caught my attention. He seemed to be struggling with his suitcase. It looked like he was asking a few people nearby to hold his suitcase for him, but no one was willing to help. He appeared quite flustered and anxious, constantly looking at his watch. I also glanced at the time on my phone, realizing Rose's flight wouldn't arrive for another hour. Thinking I had plenty of time, I decided to approach and help him. He was very grateful, continuously thanking me. He introduced himself as Egan. Egan said he would be back in 30 minutes and handed me a piece of paper with a phone number before hurriedly leaving. The paper was typed neatly, not handwritten. I didn't get a chance to ask Egan what he was up to, but I wasn't curious anyway. I continued waiting at the airport, this time waiting for both Egan and Rose. 30 minutes passed, but Egan hadn't returned yet, so I told myself I'd wait a little longer to see what happened. Lost in my phone, when I looked up again, Egan was already 20 minutes late. I called the phone number Egan had given me, but it said the number didn't exist. I double-checked the number I dialed, and it matched the one on the paper Egan left behind. I tried calling many times more, but the phone kept saying the number didn't exist. I started to panic, unsure if this Egan guy was just messing with me or had some other motive. All I had was this piece of paper with a phone number that I couldn't contact. All I could do was wait and hope that Egan would return soon because I had a long itinerary with Rose. 20 more minutes passed and Egan still hadn't shown up. At this point, I was extremely anxious. I searched the suitcase for any accurate contact information Egan might have left behind. As I sat down to inspect the suitcase, I noticed it was nearly soaked, with a faint pink liquid dripping onto the floor. It had a strong, familiar smell, like the cleaning solution I often used. The suitcase was quite old, and even its lock was broken. It seemed like the contents had shifted and leaked out. I was disappointed not to find any other personal information about Egan. Later, Rose arrived, and we were happy to see each other. Rose was excited to continue the planned vacation, but I needed to deal with the suitcase first. We decided to take it to the airport security personnel. As we started moving, I was surprised by how heavy the suitcase was. It estimated to be about 120 pounds. I asked Rose to pull her suitcase so that I could move Egan's suitcase more easily. Struggling to pull Egan's suitcase ahead, Rose followed behind. After a while, the sound of tearing fabric made me quite uneasy. Looking back, the suitcase seemed fine, so I continued moving. Suddenly, there was a loud tearing sound, and Rose immediately screamed and collapsed.
When I turned around, the sight before me left me petrified. From inside the suitcase, a neck was protruding. I emphasized that it was the neck of a headless body. People around us noticed, screamed in fear. Many of them panicked and ran away. Rose had fainted and I was terrified and confused. My brain couldn't process, think, or function anymore. I sat down on the floor staring helplessly at my dear friend. Airport police arrived quickly, and the suitcase containing the body was taken to the station. Rose was taken to the medical room. The police asked me many questions, but all I could provide was the piece of paper Egan had given me. It was then that I realized something was wrong. The phone number on the paper was typed, indicating that everything was premeditated rather than spontaneous. Why didn't I realize it at the time? The police used data from the security camera and provided it to me for identification. It was the blonde man who had given me the suitcase. I was detained at the airport police station for the next 2 days to coordinate the investigation. The body in the suitcase was examined, and the identity was determined. It was a high school girl reported missing by her family 3 days ago. After investigating all the citizen records, the police identified the man in the security camera footage. That man's name was Joe, not Egan, a 17-year-old teenager living in Michigan. Realizing the absurdity, the police continued investigating the fingerprints on the paper scrap in the suitcase. Strangely, the fingerprints found did not match those in the population management database. They also did not match the fingerprints of the teenager named Joe. In the end, who was that man? And why was he so ruthless? I was truly exhausted by those horrifying events. My and Rose's vacation was ruined. I should have been more vigilant and noticed the strange thing about Egan's paper. My trust and kindness were exploited. Even today, almost 5 years after that incident, I still can't escape from that horrifying story. I'm Jonathan, 31 years old. I work as a long-haul bus driver. Currently, I live with my wife in the town of Galena. That evening, I received a late-night passenger ride to the town, about a 3-hour drive from my home. After safely dropping off the passengers at 11 p.m., I immediately headed back home. As usual, I would find the nearest motel to spend the night before returning home in the morning. But that day was very important because my wife was about to give birth and was waiting for me in the hospital. We were expecting our first child, a cute little boy, and just the thought of it made me very excited. I searched on Google Maps for the shortest route home. Following Google Maps directions for about an hour, I turned right off the highway onto a narrow dirt road. At that moment, I was only thinking about my wife and child, not noticing the ominous darkness enveloping the road in my car. After driving a bit further, suddenly the radio in my car started making static noises. I tried to turn off the knob but couldn't, and adjusting the radio frequency didn't stop the annoying static noise. Feeling helpless, I lightly tapped the radio and thought there might be a problem with it. Suddenly, a woman's voice came from the radio.
Please be advised, ahead you will encounter a landslide on the road. Absolutely do not talk or make eye contact with the people there unless you want to endanger your life.
I was extremely surprised, but then thought it might be some program airing on the radio. After driving a bit more, the road ahead indeed had a landslide, and there was a warning sign. I looked around in astonishment, and 2 rescue workers emerged from the darkness. I couldn't see their faces clearly, only their silhouettes. One was very overweight and the other was thin. They slowly approached the BMW parked in front of my car. The owner of the BMW stepped out and politely greeted them. Suddenly, the thin rescue worker rushed forward and grabbed the BMW owner. They both fell in front of the BMW, so I couldn't see what was happening. I was quite panicked at that moment, wondering if I should run over to assess the situation or not. The horrifying began to unfold. The overweight rescue worker was staring directly at my car, but it wasn't a normal look. He turned his head 180 degrees, his face and back facing towards me.
He was smiling, a wide, ear-to-ear grin. He maintained that posture and walked towards my car. I was extremely frightened, quickly shifted into reverse and pressed on the gas to back up. But my car didn't budge. I became even more frantic. That rescue worker had now walked right next to the driver's side window of my car. I remembered the instructions from the woman on the radio, not to talk or make eye contact with the people there. I trembled, trying to keep my gaze straight ahead. The rescue worker leaned down to look into my car, still wearing that eerie smile. He repeatedly pounded on my car window, not with his hands but with his head. My heart was pounding at full force, and I closed my eyes, gripping the steering wheel tightly. The pounding grew louder and more intense. The only thing in my head at that moment was my wife and the soon-to-be-born child. I don't know how long after the pounding stopped. I took a deep breath and slowly opened my eyes. The overweight rescue worker was still staring into my car and smiling. In front of me was the thin rescue worker, his body covered in blood. I didn't know what he had done to the BMW owner. My car was now started. I immediately reversed and sped away at 62 miles per hour. After driving a fair distance, I calmed down. I suddenly remembered I had to call the police. I tried to describe in detail everything I had just experienced. The police told me to stay calm and send them my location. After identifying my location, the police asked me to stay put so they could find me as quickly as possible. I agreed, but as soon as I hung up the phone, I remembered my wife in the hospital. Without much thought, I immediately pressed on the gas and sped away. When I saw the turnoff leading to the highway, I was relieved. But as soon as I turned the steering wheel to enter, in front of me was the dirt road with the landslide and those two rescue workers. What on earth is happening? I immediately turned the car around and sped off, not wanting to encounter those two terrifying figures again. But everything seemed to be mocking me. Once again, I returned to that road. The two rescue workers looked at me, still with that wide grin, but this time the laughter was very loud and echoed in the dark. It was as if those two lunatics were mocking me. At that moment, I didn't slow down but pressed the gas pedal even harder. I didn't know why I acted like that. The car sped up, aiming straight at those two rescue workers. In front of me, everything was pitch black. I couldn't comprehend what had happened next. Suddenly, the eerie faces of the two rescue workers appeared. Their large, wild eyes, wide grinning mouths with sharp, jagged teeth dripping with blood. They were getting closer and closer to me, the mouth gaping wide as if to swallow everything. They emitted the cry of a newborn baby. It pierced my ears painfully. I woke up. In front of me was the hospital scene, my wife holding our son sitting on a wheelchair next to my bed. I woke up completely sober when I realized the crying of my son. My wife burst into tears when she saw me awake. She said the police found me sitting in the car in an unconscious state. I asked my wife where I was found. She said it was on the dirt road with the landslide, but there was no BMW or rescue workers there. The police concluded that my accident was due to night driving leading to stress and drowsiness. I recounted to the police and my wife what I had experienced, but they all thought it was just a nightmare. After, the accident left me with repercussions. I often suffered from headaches, so I couldn't drive anymore. My car, after being repaired for a week at the garage, was brought back home. Strangely, the dirt on the driver's side window couldn't be cleaned. I realized with a start that it was the mark when the overweight rescue worker used his head to pound on it. Until now, I still couldn't explain everything that happened that night. I'm Richard, 29 years old. I work as a driver for the ride-sharing company Uber. Currently, I live with my grandmother in a small house in San Francisco. Here, the demand for ride-sharing services from people is very high. I might be able to scrape out a living for me and my grandmother. If there's no important matter, I'll work every day from 9 a.m. to 10 p.m. One weekend evening, I had almost no passengers for the whole day. At 10 p.m. when I was about to end my workday, suddenly the app showed a ride request.
Looking at the distance, it was quite far in the suburban area. But since I didn't have many passengers all day, I gladly decided to accept the ride. The passenger's location was about a mile from where I was standing. I started moving to pick up the passenger. When I arrived at the exact location, there was no one around. I felt quite anxious, thinking of calling the customer. Suddenly, a girl appeared out of nowhere, bending down to look through the car window and smiling at me. I startled. I dropped my phone, taking a few seconds to process everything. I quickly got out of the car to greet the girl, but I began to feel uneasy. She, with long tousled hair, wearing a long white dress, holding a doll. It wasn't an ordinary doll. Its face was haunting with large black eyes covering half of its face. It was more terrifying than the Annabelle doll in the horror movie I watched. As I was lost in my thoughts about the doll, suddenly the girl spoke.
Take me home, please.
Her voice was very soft, giving a gloomy feeling as if echoing from the depths of hell. I felt a surge of cold air running down my spine. I nervously chuckled and opened the car door for her. But she looked at me with amusement and then proceeded to open the door and sit in the back seat. I quickly sat in the driver's seat and started the car. Even though I'm a 29-year-old guy with a fairly tall stature, in that situation, I'm sure anyone would be as shaken as I was. I drove, my body drenched in sweat even though the air conditioning in the car was on. As I was about to stop at a red light, that girl uttered that scary voice again.
What if we run the red light? If you get fined, I'll pay. Don't worry.
After saying that, she chuckled, and I also laughed out loud to dispel that ominous atmosphere. But my laughter stuck in my throat. I said I'm a law-abiding person, so I wouldn't do that.
You're such a coward. But living people are usually like that. Unlike me.
Again, that teasing laughter, but it was really not amusing at all. My body was cold, but I kept sweating. All I could do was to gulp and stay as calm as possible. I remained silent, trying to drive a bit faster to end this ride. Occasionally, I glanced at the rearview mirror to check on the back seat. Focus on driving, please, that gentle voice echoed, making me startle, instantly stiffening my body. Suddenly, there was a desperate scream, and reflexively I turned back to look. A grotesque face with bulging white eyes full of red veins, the mouth screaming loudly, was inches from my face. The horror I felt at that moment cannot be described. I panicked and screamed loudly. Fortunately, the sharp reflexes of a driver helped me step on the brake correctly, instead of the gas pedal. The girl, holding the doll with the grotesque face, fell back into the back seat, laughing hysterically. I still hadn't recovered. My heavy breathing only seemed to excite her even more.
Do living people get startled like that?
What on earth was happening to me? I didn't know if I was carrying a person, a ghost, or mentally unstable. Seeing that I didn't say anything, discomfort was evident on her face. She twisted the doll's head back to its original position, with the black eyes as before, then dirtied it. She said she just wanted to play a little. I had thought of ending this ride here. The girl pointed forward, saying we were almost home, and I just needed to drive a little further. Having come this far, I reconsidered and continued driving. Now, whether it was a person or a ghost or anything else, I didn't care anymore. When we reached where she called home, I stopped, got out of the car politely, and opened the door. She stepped out, smiling at me. Now I looked closely. She was extremely beautiful, with a bright, innocent, and very attractive smile. The ride cost $40, and she handed me a $100 bill, saying there was no need to return the change. I thanked her and was about to turn and leave, but looking around, it was a dark dirt road with no houses around. I asked her if she was sure this was home. She laughed and said someone from her family would come to pick her up right now. I looked down and saw her standing on the ground with both feet and casting a shadow on the road under the car's headlights. I breathed a sigh of relief, reassuring myself that this wasn't a ghost. But I couldn't leave her alone like that, so I decided to stay with her until her family came to pick her up. A moment later, a luxurious Rolls-Royce arrived. The girl waved to me and got into the car. Only now did I understand what had happened. I also got in the car and drove in the opposite direction. Looking in the rearview mirror, my mind kept thinking about that girl. Now I remembered I hadn't asked her name. But just a few seconds later, when I looked back, the Rolls Royce had disappeared into the night. I didn't know when. I couldn't be sure if everything was a dream or real, nor could I tell if that girl was a human or a ghost. I've heard and watched many stories and movies about supernatural phenomena, but I never thought I would encounter such an inexplicable phenomena in real life.